Oh, did it go? Okay, there it goes. Hello, hello. If you can hear me, please let me know. That way we can make sure to talk and do all the things and get into it today. If you... Okay.
Oh, they can hear us. They can always hear us. Every single week they can hear us. This is the week where both of us come through like robotic, odd, weird voices.
It'd be about our luck.
I'm looking forward to this episode far more than I probably should be. And it's not for all the good reasons. It's for the bad. Because holy crap do I have issues with this whole Everqueen nonsense, particularly how it has been portrayed, re-portrayed, attempted to be fixed, not fixed at all, through the various editions of Warhammer. I love the Everqueen. I don't love the Everqueen, though.
Yeah, this one's going to be a really interesting episode because there's going to be a lot of talk about what is implied to be the case with the Everqueens, which unfortunately tends to be very different from what we know for a fact is going on. It's a bit of a mess, but that's why we're here to talk about it. It's gonna be a it's one of these frustrating aspects of the setting where it's kind of one of those things that is, if you look at it for a couple seconds, you'll immediately go, oh, well, this is obviously like super duper duper important. Like this is one of the most important things to one of the most important factions in the setting. And then when you really look into it, you go, oh no. Oh no.
It's so true. I mean, it's beyond true. The more you look into this one, the more you start going, but wait a minute. Wait, doesn't that mean, but wait a minute, doesn't that also mean, but wait a minute, doesn't that also, and the more you look into this one, as you're going to find out, not only does it sort of not make sense, but there is a strong undercurrent of heck, which is worth noting too. But we can always justify it with, hey, they're elves. They're different. It's fine.
Yeah, it's, that being said, as I mentioned, there is the implied stuff, which is always fun to get into, which we do a lot here on Lorebeards, is things that could have been the case or should have been the case, which is an important note. And there is so much, there's so much to say about the Everqueen as far as what she should be. And I mean, I'll be very blunt right here of that. This is kind of one of those situations where, although they were trying their best, GW writers often accidentally got themselves twisted up into a very, like, to put it very bluntly, a very male-centric focus on a lot of factions. Of that, the High Elves shouldn't have been. The Phoenix King should actually be a lot less important than the Everqueen, but she's not.
And I think to a degree this can be not justified per se, but it can be understood because there's a story there that Games Workshop doesn't actually tell, but the implications of the story they're telling clearly have it. So I think we can justify much of what's about to occur. However, it's not because Games Workshop necessarily intended it. It sort of happened because of the things that they've created and them not making a great deal of sense when you look at the black and white words and attempting to put it all together. And behind it all, there is some ways that we can make this make sense. So I hope this one's going to be fun for you all as we take a relatively deep dive into all things that are Everqueen Alarielle and, of course, her heart. Oh, because it is obviously also our Valentine's Day stream. We're a little bit late, but then we're also a day late to be doing this stream anyway. So, well, hey, late is fine.
Only a little. We're actually closer than we usually are.
Yeah, totally. And on top of that also, I've yet to do the Valentine's Day thing yet with my wife for Lindsay. So I'm even later. So that being all the case, it's fine. As any of you out there know, I am somewhat prone to having Nurgle sitting on my shoulder as well, just squelching away and making my life tough. So we decided to postpone it for a little bit while I recuperate and get better again.
Yeah. All right. So I think without further ado, we can go ahead and knock out kind of the early things that came in, super chats that we're doing during the little chat here at the start, and then we'll get into Andy's intro, and then we'll carry along. So Without further ado, WPKM, hello, my first super chat. Oh, well, thank you. So glad to have you by. Love listening to you while
Indeed.
driving. I have many questions to ask in the future, so please look out after yourself and be well, Andy. That's a really funny. We appreciate that. That's great. That's such a funny way to put that. I have questions that I need answered. So if you could just
look after yourself,
if you could just not be ill, that'd be great. Thank you, Tyrant. Rank Hobgoblins, Skaven, and Tzeentchians from most to least trustworthy. I would probably say from most to least, I'd probably say Skaven, Hobgoblins, Tzeentch would probably be my personal ranking.
Really tough, isn't it?
It's hard. Tzeentch, I think Tzeentch is reliably at the bottom.
Yeah, Tzeentch is arguably quite trustworthy under circumstances. The Skaven are very trustworthy if it is in their own interest for them to be trustworthy. The Hobgoblins are, as a species, plastered with the idea of being untrusted, largely because of events that they've done in the past, but they have also managed to build up an entire empire up there on the steppe. So all of them, I'd say, have got different versions of their background according to which area you go to, and some Skaven are arguably trustworthy, but I think for me Skaven are almost certainly by their nature and also by their religion the least trustworthy. It is always in their best interest to take a stab to get ahead, no matter what the circumstances are, and if there's an open door there, they'll walk through it almost every time. They are reliably unreliable, where the Hobgoblins seem to do it when it's in their best interest, and also it doesn't get them boshed in the head, and when they're actually in control, they don't appear to be that untrustworthy. So Hobgoblins, I'd say, perhaps less sneaky and stabby than you might necessarily expect in some iterations. Tzeentchians are as entirely changeable as the wind. So I'm going to put them in the middle and say the Skaven are the least trustworthy. The Tzeentchians sit in the middle because sometimes they are always untrustworthy, sometimes they aren't. And Hobgoblins, I'm very surprising myself and putting at the top in a way that might be controversial. I quite like that.
Sean Saltz, how did Alarielle and Tyrion meet for the first time? So most of this is covered in the Tyrion Teclis trilogy, which was by who? Will and King. Okay. Yeah, Will and King. And if memory serves, which usually it does, they met in a tournament. So basically, Alarielle moves up to the position of Everqueen rather suddenly because her mother passes away. And there is a tournament to essentially kind of find her a champion. You can think of it that way. And she meets Tyrion because he's one of the finalists. He gets to like the very last level, him and one other prince. And then Dark Elves attack because this is right as the Dark Elves are invading at the start of, well, actually more like start, end? I guess it would be the start of the Great War because the elf stuff resolves before the Empire stuff does. So they meet right before shit hits the fan. So, you know, they trauma bond really well, which is that helps their relationship.
Yeah, the whole Tyrion story went through a bit of a rewrite because originally Tyrion and Teclis were just too young. If you actually looked at their first ages when first presented as characters, and they got deepened a little and aged up a little so that they would be, by the time that the end time set, around about 600 rather than being around about 250, 300 or something similar. And the story of Alarielle and Tyrion meeting gets sort of pushed back a little bit to when she first becomes Everqueen. So it's all the way back to when she first becomes the Everqueen. And at that point, there is a tournament, as said, and it gets attacked by Dark Elves. There's a big whole thing, and they trauma bond. That is pretty much exactly what happens. But it is worth noting that little extra detail that the story got developed because the first iteration of it, when you started to look at it, much like most of the stuff to do with the Everqueens when you start to look at it, is a little bitty problematic. I'll add one last thing just in case you didn't know. They're related. 100% related. They are both of the same line, which is the line of Anarion. So Anarion, the defender, yep, that's it. So they're related to begin with, but they're elves, so it's okay, and they're not that closely related. Unless...
It's not. Yeah, but elves, nobody cares for elves. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's elves, so it's okay.
Morning Crescent. Alaria loves us all, especially Tyrion. Lord Chris, the Sword of Cade's favorite lady. Thank you, Total War. Yeah, there was this is something that of course has creeped its way into the memedom slash like cultural knowledge of Alarielle, which I do find very funny. And I do think there's actually some interesting stuff that could be done with it in a less joking sense. But of course, for those that are aware of like the rather amusing history with Civilization and Gandhi, where the programming for it, there was an accident where they tried to make Gandhi so peaceful that the integer essentially reversed, and it made him the most warlike and terrifying of the civilization leaders.
He just nuked everyone. I played that game, and boy, did he nuke him.
Yeah, so that essentially happened with Alarielle as well, where there was nothing in her programming that necessarily meant that she was any less warlike than the other legendary lords, and she started the closest to the Sword of Cain. So she always gets the Sword of Cain first in a lot of versions of the game, which means that she would draw it immediately and go on the warpath and be absolutely terrifying.
Funny.
Which is great. That's always a fantastic little storyline. Tyrant, make Balthazar Gelt the Everqueen despite Andy. He would truly be the prettiest girl at the ball.
You mean, sure. Why not?
Kornshima, do Everqueens only have one daughter? No. What if they have 2+? So Alarielle did have a sister. Her sister dies young, but it's not. It kind of follows. It seems to follow the logic along that the eldest daughter will be who it passes on to, but there have been Everqueens that have had multiple children. It's not considered like a huge deal. I mean, the first Everqueen that we really know about, which was Astarielle, she had a son and a daughter, but it always passes to the oldest daughter once the mother passes away, which is, we'll get into the whole thing about like how the lineage works and some of the issues that start to crop up really fast. As we get into it. Ian O'Brien, first time being able to join the stream. Well, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Great to see you here.
Hear about the least explored child whose fate is absolutely cursed by Cain. You're not wrong.
You're not wrong.
There is a definite thing where because of the way the Everqueens, you're right. And it's weird because it's something that the writers should have thought about and they didn't.
It's really annoying, but we can justify this, and indeed we will give it a go to do so. It's crap. The justification will be shit, but it's as good as any other.
Yeah, the millisecond that any of his children got the Curse of Cain, it should have been given to all of his descendants. And they just sort of forget about that for the Everqueen line, because all of the Everqueens, all of them should have the Curse of Cain after that, after he draws that sword. So we'll get into that. Tyrant 25, are there any mortal characters who can stand a snowball's chance in hell against an Aryan? No. Not really.
I disagree. All manner of characters potentially could, because the Warhammer world, every time you say no, there's always an exception.
Yeah.
Nagash is, I suppose, a mortal character. I reckon they'd have a good old shindig, a big old bash should they wish to do so. There's the dragons, they're mortal. There's lots of characters inside the Warhammer world that are mortal, and if they went up against what is effectively an elven god, would give it a good go. He is, after all, an elevated mortal only. He can be taken down, and indeed was, as we're going to be discussing this Wednesday. So just in 2 days' time, where we're going to be taking up the stream, if an Aryan lived, what would have happened? And holy shit, do I have opinions. So the answer to this is, yes, a lot of things would have a snowball's chance in hell, but the reality of it is the vast majority would not. And by the vast majority, I mean 99.9999, in the same way that any that go against, say, for example, the Grand Cathay's Emperor. That dragon, 99.999% of mortals, they're going to die. And in a similar fashion, anyone that goes against an Aryan is probably going to die until you meet the next immovable Warhammer object. And you realize that suddenly there's quite a lot of them out there, and there's always someone who can say, hey, see that peg? I'm going to take it down a notch or two. I'm going to give it a good go.
Yeah, that's true. There, especially when you start considering like realistic situations as opposed to like sticking them in a box together. I
mean, each faction has got its own equivalent of I'm actually a god, Mazda Mundi. You just throw him out there just for a bit of fun. Okay, move over towards the Skaven, and suddenly there's all manner of weird characters sitting on their stupid council that suddenly does something that makes an Aryan pause for a moment. So yeah, it's complicated.
The Blow Person, evening lad. Speaking of the Everqueen, do you prefer the Handmaidens of the Everqueen as characters, 8th edition onwards, or did you prefer the main guard unit pre 7th edition?
I have opinions in this as well.
Yes.
One of my biggest issues from my side is that Warhammer is supposed to present a big game with some characters and loads of cool units that you can play, and they could fit on either side. But the Maiden Guard unit, the Handmaidens, are only 100 strong. That's it. They don't get any bigger. There is 100 of them, and each one of them is said to be peak elf. Each one of them is said to be effectively the strongest that a high elf can almost be. They are not just this, though. They are also great musicians and lovers and players of games and everything else, too, because if you're an elf, of course, you're peak everything. And of these 100, we're then meant to go play a game of Warhammer where everything is scaled down, where units of, say, 12 actually represent potentially hundreds of warriors. Maybe just a 4-to-1 even, so 12 is maybe about 50 warriors, something like that. But if we scale up a unit of, say, 50 handmaidens, it goes beyond the scale that Warhammer allows. So, from my perspective, they are super cool characters, but they don't really make a proper unit unless they change the background. And they say that there's fucking loads of handmaidens all over Avalorn doing cool handmaiden shit, but they don't. There's only 100. That being the case, I prefer them as characters.
Yeah, I was going to say this. I would say very much the same, where the handmaidens are meant to be like the elite bodyguard that are supposed to be absolute ass kickers to the extreme. Like one of them showing up is a big deal. So I think when they took them and made them into a very awesome, very powerful hero that makes that works with the and they made the Sisters of Avalorn, which were a much more like, these are warriors that are associated with the Everqueen, but they're not her personal guard. And they're still hyper elite because of their like super crazy magic bows. I found that was a much better solution personally. The main guard, I was not a fan of the main guard because it was like, oh, these are the protectors of literally the singular most important person in Ulthuan. Like if the Phoenix King dies, that sucks. But we can elect a new one. If the Everqueen just dies without like a lot of contingencies in place, Ulthuan is just immediately fucked. Like it's instant game over for the High Elves. Like she is so much more important. So her guard should be the most elite squad of people on the face of the island.
In fact, I'd go a bit further than that. And I'd say it's not just a matter that the High Elves are fucked, the world's fucked.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing. The nature of the Everqueen got a little bit of power creep through the course of the editions and then into the novels, particularly novels. Graham McNeil went to town on the Everqueen and really made her not just a symbol of the High Elves and the symbol of, but basically the god. And as the god, if she should fall, the entire world knows about it. Everywhere in the world, there will be repercussions. The elves will be benighted. The dark elves have a party. Pretty much, unless you're magically dead, like the dwarves, it's going to be shit. So having the appropriately powered guard of the Everqueen around them makes sense. And the original version of them was basically just a bunch of Warhammer statted dudettes, in this particular case, who were capable of doing stuff. And that worked fine. But they changed the Everqueen and they changed the guard with each edition, and they just power creep their way up to they no longer work really well as just normal people who protect the Everqueen.
Vidolfi, sorry. You guys saved my love of Warhammer. Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say. I fell out of it due to the problematic tubers. Thank you for being awesome people, keeping it going. Well, you know, I like... Yeah, thank you, first of all. Second of all, I like to think that Andy and I are... This is going to sound a little facetious, but I feel like we're a more accurate representation of what your average Warhammer fans are like.
Yeah.
Of people that just enjoy it and try and make it make sense and have good
fun.
As opposed to the other stuff. Unfortunately, because of the way the internet works, being an angry and saying really ugly things tends to make you a lot more money. But that's just not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, this is all true. In fact, I was often amused at some of the points that were raised. Say, for example, I was running Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I get some points from people who claim to know the background. They say, "Why did you do this? It's completely against it." And me being me, I can't stop. I was like, "Well, you're wrong. This is why. And they were often coming from various problematic corners who then went off and said, I've just received this. Look at these. This is nonsense. And then me being me, I followed up and said, here's the long list of sources. This is why it's not nonsense. This is also why what you're saying isn't correct. And I can't help myself, so I'm going to make sure that you understand this is where you can get it all. And what I found was often the problematic elements were tiny. Like maybe one or two people with a lot of people around them who just went, oh, this is the way it is. Great. But when they realized it wasn't that way around, they went, oh, actually, you're wrong. And I felt it was worth tackling that. I thought it was worth my time to show that the Warhammer setting is significantly bigger and deeper than a lot of people were trying to paint it into corners with. So I'm glad that you think that what we're doing is worthwhile, because we do. We have fun. And I'm glad also that you think it has reignited your love for Warhammer, because for me, Warhammer is a marvelous setting that, for all it has had many weird choices throughout the course of its history, most of them can be grounded in what was, at the time, very good hoped for thinking that turned out to be not necessarily the best choices, and then it was written over when they realized that perhaps some of the choices they made weren't the best. This isn't Warhammer 40k, where the core of the setting is to be effectively problematic. And this is a problematic setting, and we dance around the problematic elements, trying to show how it's satire, but it sort of isn't, and how these aren't really good guys. They are representations of fascism, but they're sort of not, and they all dance around and get confused. Warhammer is not that. It's just a big, complex fantasy setting, and that is for its, I think, benefit.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Super Orlock, thank you for the thank you for the cat face. Chevale or Cheval, one of those two. Alarielle is my favorite Warhammer character. Is her relationship with Aisha and power to cleanse/heal an example that the elves might be wrong about divine magic?
No.
Yep, I would agree with Andy's assertion. We'll get more into it. We are going to talk about the. This is going to be one of those streams where I'm going to cheat a little bit and let us talk a little bit about avatars of gods versus how they appear in a certain other place in the world, which allows people to look and go, what's going on here? Well, we're going to talk about it today.
Yeah, I'm actually, when we get to the introduction, I'm going to keep the introduction short this week, because there's lots of potential discussions that might come up from this topic, both from the questions that you ask and from our discussion as we inevitably hightail it in different directions, because there's a lot to discuss here. So I'll keep my intro relatively short to ensure we've got enough space, because some of the stuff we're going to be talking about is pretty deep Warhammer, in particular when it comes to what the hell is an avatar anyway, and what is going on elsewhere, which I think we're going to have to discuss to some degree, because holy shit, there is an enormous difference between, say, for example, Alarielle and someone else.
Yep. Sultar, listening to Elf Strife while painting dwarfs, can't think of anything better. Don't just sitting there being like, of course they deal with that. Silly elves. King Bjorn, hello, love listening to you both. Thank you. We appreciate
Thank you so much. Massively heartfelt on my side as well, for that you're out there listening. Big hearts. Valentine's episode. Little hearts.
Christopher Clayton, elves making dwarfen family trees look normal. Yeah, though, to be fair, dwarfs also have some weird stuff going on.
To answer this one specifically, Clayton, for my own game that I'm doing with Lawhammer, I've got a family tree built of the line of Anarian, so that I can know who the line of Anarian is. And I sort of regret trying to build it, because it is not just a very difficult line to build, given that there's been conflicting writers making slightly different stories, but it's exceedingly cross-pollinated and difficult in a way that makes real-life bloodlines look really easy. And I personally come from a family that has some very cross bloodlines in its past, because there's a lot of royal blood in my past, and a lot of them are sort of interrelated and weird, and that looks easy by comparison to the comparatively few generations between the Cataclysm and the End Times. You'd think it would be easy, but no, it's really, really complicated. So yeah, and dwarf family trees are by comparison relatively easy, because you just go down the female side and it becomes much easier, because there's so far fewer women than there is men inside the dwarven society and their clans.
Eli the Gray. I just got my copy of Dark Deeds last Wednesday, but ran late to the stream. Let's see y'all cover one of my favorite inconsistent characters today. Hell yeah! Thank you for buying
Dark Deeds. Go buy yourself a copy. If you haven't done so yet, you should. I'm not going to dance or sing because that would just be bad. But I will say that Dark Deeds is an absolutely immense game created by the marvelous minds of Mark Gibbons and Andy Chambers, along with my little rule writing editions. And you should go buy yourself a copy because it's freaking amazing and looks pretty.
Also, there's genuine FOMO at play because it's a limited run. So once it's out, it's out. So you better, and it's running out. So go get it.
It is. Good point. Well made.
Kobo, the local prince and princesses of the various kingdoms all have a degree of self-autonomy, and the Phoenix King does his own thing. So how much authority does the Everqueen have?
Get to that.
So we will get to that because that's a great question that
Bloody marvelous.
Very few people bother to tackle. It's actually
it's worth noting. On the broadest case, because we're going to have to get to this as we drill into it, there is a gendered nature to how the Everqueen and the Phoenix King present. And they are viewed to have different things that they're supposed to do because of what they are. And the character we're discussing today breaks those norms hard. And is thus a figure of great controversy for some. So yeah, we'll be getting onto this, particularly because Alarielle is a great place to discuss it, because she is herself a walking, let's say, rebel in comparison to what the expectations normally would be placed upon her position and her role.
Watchdog, what in your mind would a wargame model of Alarielle need to embody who she is?
So fucking much more.
Yeah.
I haven't liked any of them. I actually actively despise the Total War version, which I know is strong, but I despise her not just because of the model, which just looks like a human with a crappy pair of ears slapped on. I despise it because they didn't take the opportunity to make something new, and I know why. Because it's a licensor, they have to take what Games Workshop did and just basically copy it. And Games Workshop's previous attempts at Alarielle have almost all been weak ass, particularly when you then discuss what they write in the words, and the words are deep, meaningful, and expressive. The models they've released so far have been the worst. Now I will say though, if we pop over to Age of Sigmar, they gave it a damn good stab over there. And the Age of Sigmar model, I think, is pretty freaking cool, but strictly speaking, it's not really Alarielle. It's like this combo figure that was created later.
Yeah, Ariel and Alarielle.
Yeah. It's a bit of a mergy, messy thing. But nevertheless, they make a damn fine stab at creating something relatively majestic. I think what they have created so far has not been majestic, has not been the Everqueen. It has been often just a tiny little model. And it just doesn't do justice for what the character is described as.
Yeah, and I'll say that this is kind of one of those things where it's like... the best way I could put it is that when you're dealing with Alarielle from fantasy, there is not, and me and Andy talked about this when we were trying to get the thumbnail for this, there is no good artwork of her. All of the artwork of her, unfortunately, is really, really bad. It's just not drawn well. And even when you have artists that can draw well, they don't make her, she's always very human, or she's always just so simple, and a lot of the artwork, unfortunately, is just bad.
The only one that I thought, at least they've given it a stab to make it look like a Warhammer version of what it was, as I recall, in one of the card games. I forget which one. I think it was Warcry, maybe. It was one of the FFG games. I've got it somewhere where they slap her amongst without her guard. It's Warcry, thanks. I quite like that game. It's quite fun. In fact, I've got every single card for it because I'm an idiot who spends too much money on absolutely everything. But yes, I think great game, and they gave it a go at least. But nevertheless, it's just any old elf leading a little group of things. It's not the Everqueen.
10,000 ads. If you could tour one Warhammer city, which one? Oh, if I could tour it like without any problems whatsoever,
no danger.
I would probably. I would probably go to. Honestly, I would probably want to go to Itza. I think I'd want to go to the first city.
This is a really tough one. Because I have ones that I would want to go to because I've helped significantly towards the creation of various iterations of it, like, say, Altdorf. I would love to see Altdorf. And I would love to see my Altdorf, which is so very different to the versions that have been presented in the various maps that are out there, because none of the maps map what's actually described. So I would love to just sort of go and safely look around the colleges of magic, look down into Underaldorf and what the Skaven have done, look through all of the various crazy things, whether it's the palace, whether it's the great grand gardens of Mor, or whatever else it might be. That's kind of cool. But really, if I was just looking for pure spectacle, then it's hard not to say somewhere like, say, Nagarond. Holy crap, that would be astonishingly interesting to see. Itza would be extraordinary. Moving over towards where the Phoenix King, or even Avalorn. I mean, it's difficult. Lothern, Avalorn, they're great. And then I go, oh, wait a minute, Grand Cathay. Oh, crap, I'm just gone. As I go from faction to faction and each one of the capitals. I mean, imagine seeing that big black pyramid of Nagash. That would be super cool. Or,
yeah,
or the depths of Nagashazar itself. My problem is, if I could tour one Warhammer city, I'm not sure I could choose because there's so many extraordinary sights to see. And Warhammer's just got too much that honestly, I find this one really hard.
I would need so many assurances before picking various options of like, all right, if I witness something that would break my mind because of how horrible it is, like what's the what are my defenses here? Turnpike, what do you think is the average size of an elven family? Humans have loads of kids, but that's because pre-industrial children tend to die before the age of 5. So this is actually an interesting thing that I wish had been tackled better, and I hope the roleplay game takes a whack at. Even
Holy
though
crap! I hope they do.
I don't have the highest faith in it, but you never know, because it's kind of that thing of that you would expect that elves probably wouldn't have a lot of children in a home at any given time, but they live for so long. You would imagine it'd probably be likely for them to have generations of children, but like centuries apart, as opposed to only a couple of years apart. Depending on the elven family, but it also might depend on like the culture of the kingdom. Like I could see elves in Thrace having larger families, or in like some of the outer kingdoms having slightly larger families, but those in places like Kothic might have smaller families because they live more like of a city urban lifestyle. But I don't think there's a great answer for this. A lot of the times, in most of my readings, a lot of elven families seem to have like 2 to 3 kids ultimately, which is not a lot, but that could also explain if we're talking about high elves. Want to be very clear, we're talking about high elves. That could also be a big reason of why, you know, there's not a lot of them. Dark elves seem to have way more kids. Like a lot of dark elf books, you're often dealing with like 6+ kids to a family. So it just kind of depends, but it's a very nebulous zone.
Yeah, the problem here, Turnpike, is that there is not an actual answer from Games Workshop. And that means that each individual writer, as they go in, tend to just write it from their perspective at the time. And if they were one of the original writers, say, for example, Bill King, who wrote the original version of what we got for the High Elves in the 4th edition of the Army List, he's got one way of producing it. Then you get, say, Graham McNeil, who came in afterwards, worked through the studio. He's got another slightly different version as he works on it too. Gav Thorpe, yet another one. But each of these writers tend to go very human. And particularly because most of them are writing most of the time about high elves, not always, there's some dark elf stories too. They tend to go with a very human standard nuclear family of like a couple of kids, maybe 3 or 4. And they don't really think of what it means to be an elf, which means we then, as people who are, for example, trying to understand what they are, or if I was writing the roleplay game and I was trying to do that, we have to come up with very clear reasons for why these small families exist within elven society and what it means. Why are there so few elves around in terms of their generations on the high elf side? Fortunately, to a degree, it's already answered in the text, where they make it quite clear that the high elves are a fading species. There are not as many of them kicking around as there ever used to be back when they were in their golden era with a great empire that spanned the world. There was no dark elves, there was no high elves, there was no wood elves, there was no Aeonir or Azrai or anything else. There was just simply elves. And when they were in that place, they were a pretty populous species. And they had kids relatively quickly. Take a look at Inarian. 2 kids with the Everqueen in a space of about 3 or 4 years. They popped out like nobody's business. They were still a populous race. Everything was going. Then chaos is removed from the world. Magic is removed from the world. And the elves begin to diminish. And then past that, they split heavily with the Sundering. And on one side, we have the High Elves, who are very indolent and slow in their reproduction. On the other side, we have the Dark Elves, who are, if anything, the exact opposite, but prone to killing each other a lot. So that all kind of balances out. And then you've got the Wood Elves in between, who aren't even really elves anymore. They're a very different creation almost, very closely tied to the wood and the spirits of the wood that are there. Indeed, you might even argue that they're more elven than some might regard, because they're very close to what it used to be like in Avalorn back in the day when magic was super high. So what we have as your answer is, very loosely, here we go, High Elves don't have that many kids. All of our examples are very small families. Sometimes they only have 1 kid every once in a while, and that's about it. Dark Elves have lots of kids over an unspecified length of time, and sometimes that leaves them with families that look relatively huge, often bickering politically to gain one over the other, one-upmanship basically. So maybe families of 6 or 7, but the actual numbers that they had could be in scores, could be much more. It's just they're now dead, taken down by their rivals, their siblings, their friends, or whatever else. And Wood Elves are just a bit of a mess. The answer is, we have loose numbers that are very human-centric, and we then have to justify ourselves afterwards by looking at each species and what's written about them and coming up with reasons rather than the reasons are written in black and white.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think Malice Darkblade has it's a shit ton of siblings.
Yeah, and I quite like that for the Dark Elves as well. It all makes sense. The Dark Elves have clearly got a dynamic portion of the Mandela of Gods, where even though Isha sits over on the other side of the Mandela, the dynamic nature of the reproduction has gone on the High Elf side. They are diminishing fast.
Yep. Also, happy Valentine's Day, Lindsay. Good to see you. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you very much. Happy Valentine's Day, Lindsay. If you didn't know out there, Lindsay is obviously my wife. Yay! And she's the best. She's amazing. She's not only that, she also plays a very good wood elf over in Lorehammer, and you should go watch her.
You should.
We just had a patron release stream on one of those, and it's a sad story. It's a good one.
I look forward to watching it.
The picture's horrible.
We read that Alarielle's sister, with all the protection, the ever children, have drowned. How did she drown? Did the fisherman get her? Was it a plot to help the end time? So, if I recall correctly, the reason she actually dies is because elven children are still kids. They still are not fully grown, and bad things can happen. If I remember right, I believe she falls from a tree into water that has rocks hiding in the water. You couldn't see it, and when she falls, she hits the rocks that are in the water, so she's essentially either killed on impact or is knocked down and drowns, which shit happens. Elves are wonderful mystical beings, but sometimes some of them die to very mundane things because life just be that way sometimes, which I actually think is a good idea to introduce in the Ever family, if you're going to keep using that term, which is a terrible term.
I mean, do you have to?
In that, just because you are related to someone like the Phoenix King or the Ever Queen, doesn't mean that you're destined for an epic death. Sometimes you die to really sad, tragic, simple little things. Or you could say the Old One Fisherman got her. Sure, why not?
I mean, there'd be no issue with that if you desperately wished. To a degree, it's a bit of a mess in that they haven't really defined what all these things are. And in the few places where they do define it, you are then left scratching your head going, fuck me, elves are proper crazy, aren't they? How could they ever die? And I think it is very important from the author's perspective to ensure that they are grounded. Now, that doesn't mean grounded in a human reality. It means grounded in what the reality is for being a high elf, and particularly being a high elf from a particularly prestigious line that carries the blood of an Aryan, that is carrying the blood of gods, and what that means. And grounding that in a form of reality can be hard for some writers. Some just go over the top and go mental and go, everything is cool and over the top. 11 is not enough. I'll dial this to 111. Ha 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 ha. Where others will say, no, they're just normal kids, and watch, dead. Ha! killed. So the answer to this is different writers have taken different routes.
Yeah, but I mean, especially when you're reading like Bill or William King's writings, he tends to take a pretty grounded approach a lot of the time, which is good. I honestly appreciate a lot of that about his writings, because it does make it where he does decide to go crazy stand out in really spectacular ways.
Yeah, and you get yourself a relatively strong contrast between peak elf and elf, where some of the descriptions that say the Everqueen over in Graham McNeil's front. Holy crap, the Everqueen is the Everqueen.
Yeah, she gets pretty crazy.
And that's pretty cool as well. Yeah. But you're often then just left with, well, holy shit, what does this mean for everything else? And that's where it often gets a bit grey and fuzzy. And I think Graham nailed it, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Cameo, would Alarielle / Avalorn folk be welcome in Atha-Loren or the Lara-Loren? What do they think of each other? I'm only a bit aware of their end times lore. So generally speaking, yeah, relations would probably be pretty strong. There would be an interesting, I'm not exactly sure how the Wood Elves would handle it entirely, but the Wood Elves are noted, Ariel is noted to have deep respect for the Everqueen. When Ariel becomes aware of the fact that the Everqueen is under threat, in the 8th edition storyline for the Great War, she sends a group of Wood Elves to go save the Everqueen. And they do. They do a great job. It does not seem to matter what kind of, where the Everqueen would go. There is a deep relationship between her and all elves, which something I will want to talk about when we get into it here in just a little bit, is that does make the Dark Elf situation very interesting. And very unique. It's one of those things that's just kind of thrown, but if you really think about it, you should go, wow, this should have some really deep, weird implications. Yeah, and it's kind of just never addressed. But we'll talk about that.
Loosely on this one, the elves of Avalorn, you could very mistakenly say, well, they're just wood elves. And the mistake is, here at least, that one, yes, they are. Let's make that clear. They are. But the Wood Elves, as in the Azrai of Atha-Loren, aren't really, strictly speaking, elves as we understand them anymore. They were changed by the Wood. Which means that even though they are, in many respects, the successors of Avalorn. Avalorn did it first, and the Wood Elves came after. They changed and became something else. So the Wood Elves coming back to Avalorn are a little bit like Wood Elves coming in and being completely different species almost. They have different culture, different feelings, different needs. They are much more isolationist, but they are ultimately still kind of elves. And that being the case, they still have the tie directly to Alarielle, who is the Everqueen, who is directly tied to all nature in the world. Let's mince our words here. The world. That being the case, they have a natural tie. They can't break that tie even if they wanted to. They are directly linked through to her and the elves of Ulthuan in a host of ways, but it is often portrayed as nothing more than an alliance, an awareness, a need to recognize this ever distant Everqueen that they don't, strictly speaking, recognize as having any rulership over them, but nevertheless spiritually does. And that means that there is always inextricable links that will never be broken. Wood elves, as in the Azrai, and the Avalornians are two very different people with the same root. They both come from the same place, but they've had two big changes. On the Avalorn side, their wood was destroyed and rebuilt, and over on the Azrai side, they have the original wood and it's gone wild, and it's changed all the elves within it. So they're two different peoples with two different cultures who have a lot in common, and they mostly work together, but they very rarely ever contact each other anymore, because why? The Avalornians don't pop over to Atha-Loren all that often, and Atha-Loren law, as far as they're concerned, all that matters is home turf.
Singemeister, what's Age of Sigmar Alarielle's workout regime? She's hench. I don't know that term, but I can gather what it means by the implication. And I don't know, but you're right. She's rocking it. The gods of AOS, look at Nagash. End time / AOS Nagash is rocking like abs, despite the fact he's very undead. So, I don't know. AOS just hits different, I guess. Yeti 13 just pre-ordered some High Elves, including a Handmaiden of the Everqueen. Nice. Yeah, I'm really excited for that book. So far, the High Elf book is looking like one of the best that they've released so far. And the model line looks so good. bringing back the Island of Blood set made me so happy. So happy.
I'll admit to being a little bit biased here because I must have somewhere in the region of about 600 of those models kicking around here somewhere. So I can literally make an enormous high elf army because they haven't updated any of the miniatures pretty much, meaning that I have everything to hand if I wish to do so. I'm not sure I will. I mean, I'll buy the book, obviously, but I'm not entirely sure whether I'll build an army for it, but I do have it all here just waiting to go if I wish to do so.
Max Drop 44, is there an actual god/goddess of romantic love? Yes, there are several kicking around in different cultures. A lot of them will be local gods, but they are around all over the place. Humanity actually has a number that can kind of fall into this category. There are some things kicking around with Raya, depending on how you look at her from a certain lens, or Katya, but there are gods that fulfill that niche. Aisha has a lot to do with romantic love. A lot of her story has a lot to do with romanticism, both in in many different definitions of the word. Like Aisha is almost, you could argue in many ways, Aisha is a goddess of love, but in all of love's forms. Like if you kind of think of like the Greeks that had like a bunch of different definitions for the different kinds of love. Aisha is very much in that kind of thing, whether you're dealing with like a love of nature or a love of life in general, a love of family, or a romantic love. There's a lot of that kicking around. So yeah, but there's quite a few of them.
Yeah, I'm going to take the opposite view just because I agree with everything that Sotek says, and it's good to sometimes have some form of conflict, and that is that the vast majority of the writers for Warhammer have been men, and the vast majority of men forget about all the things that aren't men-centric. And I remember when, for example, I was writing the Tome of Salvation, and everything was basically laid out for that. I was like, there's tons of shit just missing. And I started pitching a whole bunch of extra gods and goddesses that could be added, including, as you mentioned already, Katya, over in the Empire, god of disarming beauty, as I recall. And there was a massive hole on the love side. It just wasn't just missing, it was gone. It wasn't there. And I pitched an entire god, actually, because I flipped it round, going a slightly more Apollyon route, rather than necessarily the Aphrodite route, and giving it a place where it could potentially sit. And I kind of got roundly, don't bother. That wasn't from Games Workshop. That was from the link in between Games Workshop, because I was working through another party. And I was like, really? I mean, it seems to be such an obvious gap in the god market, and human experience is absolutely wrapped up in this. Surely I want to do this and not leave all of these positive, extraordinarily interesting relationships to the horrors of, say, Slaanesh or anything like that. That's just bad. And they came back with a quick, yeah, don't worry about it, just move on to the next bit. So I did what I was told. But that means that we are left with what Sotek describes, us having to wrap up things like love into other gods' remits, into things that those gods are interested in. And it is ultimately a weaker setting for it, because especially for a realm, a setting where it's quite clear that the gods themselves, particularly the gods that manifest within the aether, manifest because of strong sentient emotion. One of the strongest ones that we are constantly writing about is love, and the lack of that representation over on the god side is, I thought, and to this day still think, a bit of a mistake, and it's something that should definitely be written in by someone at some point. If I was still doing the production job, it would have been added during the Divinity book. 100% would have been in there. I would have had a one-page spread about a god that was doing this, because it's a core component of the human experience, and it would definitely have been deified in an interesting, unique Warhammer spin on it all. But that would have been done. As it stands, it kind of doesn't exist. And that is, I think, a shame.
Yeah, and I will note that, like, especially when you consider, when you're looking at, like, the actual historical references around Aphrodite and Apollo, love gods are fucking terrifying, because they are embodiments or able to manipulate the most, or one of the most powerful emotions there is. Like if you go, I don't know if any of y'all watch like OSP Productions, they're amazing on YouTube. They have a video all about Aphrodite that talks about how she was very much recognized as a genuine terror, despite being a god of love, but was like a monster god almost that people were terrified of messing with for that very reason, because they realized the the implications of a god like that, which should absolutely exist in Warhammer.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm gonna plow through these because I appreciate y'all's generosity, but we are running behind.
Oh, well, look at that. So I will keep my intro super short when we get there. Because, you know, an intro 1/3 of the way into the stream is always, it's basically a staple for us. So, I will keep it short when we get there.
If you can find any Warhammer Fantasy character and your safety and sanity was guaranteed, who would you invite / interview on Lorebeards? With those guaranteed, probably Malekith. Or probably Marathi. Actually, Marathi would probably be more interesting than Malekith would.
I think Marathi is one of the least well considered characters in the setting. So I think she would be fascinating to round out as an individual rather than a stereotype. I think I agree on that one. And assuming that we have ourselves an ability to communicate with language also, and they are willing to talk, that would make a pretty good one. There would be obvious peaks. In fact, no, I think Marathi was around from the beginning. She would be fascinating because she's been around since the Cataclysm. And that's something that's easy to forget. She is a living survivor of that era, much more so than, say, her son. So, yeah, probably that one. So many different aspects of the lore picked up in her. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've capitulated, my lords. I ordered dark deeds. Excellent. Thank you for doing so.
That means I have to take a drink. I literally have to do it. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to go and get myself more alcohol if you keep doing this.
Could elven families be small partly because the expectations investment for each child is so high, a bit like modern middle-class pressures? I think that could, I would say it's hard to think of it that way. That could be a way you approach it, particularly with the high elves. Because high elves have a very strict social structure compared to the other two. So that could be a way you approach it. It probably is not the angle I would take, but it is a factor you could introduce.
So I did a couple of things for the Warhammer version because I wanted to justify this. And I'll give you some examples of the things that I did to make it work. For example, my elves very much can only have children if they choose to, from both sides. So an elven woman can just choose to not be impregnated every time they have sex, which means the vast majority of them, for cultural reasons, just don't. Because of the length of time, because gestation is long in my version, the length of time for the kids to actually come about, and because there's lots of shit to do, and the elves are teenagers in the moment, constantly worrying about the next thing that's on the horizon. They all have ADHD extreme, they're all super autistic, they're all, in terms of human experience and comparing them, they're all incredibly focused on whatever sits in front of them, and children get in the way. So there's an easy way to do that, where my dark elves are much more on the abandoned front, and they have abandoned that aspect of them. They no longer control when they have kids because it's considered to be effectively culturally wrong to do so. So they just let chance happen, meaning that dark elves have far more kids in my version. But the answer here is you kind of have to make up your own reasons, because as it stands, Warhammer hasn't answered this specifically. Now for Lawhammer, I have very easy, obvious solutions for it. And it builds up a host of differences between the elves and other species that make sense. And if I'd been writing the elven book, I'd have probably included some of it, what I thought Games Workshop would have gone, yeah, that sounds like our elves. But some of the stuff I created for my game, I probably wouldn't, because I'd say, yeah, Games Workshop don't want that. That's not their elves. That's very much what I'm doing for my game. But broadly speaking, the answer to this one is there's not actually an answer. And yes, we have to make them up.
Charles C.K., so what off topic does the birth rate thing mean the average dark elf is younger than the average high elf? What of the wood elves?
Yes,
yes, that would be the case. Wood elves would actually be kind of a funny mix, because wood elves have a weird thing where it's like the forest supposedly keeps them at like an even population. So when new ones die, new ones are born, or old ones die, new ones are born. So they'd be a little bit more of a mix. But yeah, the average dark elf would be young.
Yeah, elves are different over on Wood Elf side, as Sotek describes, I think, neatly, so I won't say anything more. The Forest of Loren controls all that shit. But for Dark Elves, in many respects, they're a little bit more like the Skaven in this regard, in that the vast majority of them are young and haven't got a great deal of experience, and they've got a lot of very old, very powerful elders who've been around in some cases since the beginning, as far as they're concerned, of civilization. And they've been harking it back since ages of old, and they're all competing for power underneath these entities which might be 1,000 or 2,000 years older than them. You'll find that amongst the Dark Elf families, they're often described as competing for power and removing the one at the top and replacing them. So most of the households don't have figures leading them that are more than a few centuries old, sometimes not more than 3, 4, 5, 6 centuries, which for elves is relatively young in the greater scheme of things. They can reach 1,000 or 2 without much difficulty. So most Dark Elves, yeah, they appear to die relatively young, with a few powerful ones very much holding on to their power and never letting go.
Kobo, shout out to Yuri and Poison Blade, the assassin of Everqueen Estriel, which is Alarielle's mother, for anyone curious, an accidental savior of Tyrion and Teclis. He has great design too, if you've ever seen it. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about him because he does come up a couple times. He is a very interesting character. Bill King did a really interesting story with him that I actually like quite a bit. Also, he's been through some really funny changes because he went from being more like a Dark Elf master type character, and then he got transitioned into an assassin, which was a bit of a weird journey for him. And then he kind of got turned back into a master, depending on who you ask, because they couldn't really settle on what they wanted him to be. But it is, whatever.
Yeah, I'll just simply add that he was actually one of the original inspiration points for the path rules that I was building for my version of over in Lorehammer, because there was a clear set of very different versions of that character, and I wanted to justify them all within my rule set.
Nago, not to derail, but Sarah's character drives me up a wall. His actions fit a religious zealot profile. His lore claims NPD. I don't know what we're talking about.
Okay, I feel like I'm missing something here, and occasionally I do. So, Sarah, religious NPD. Naguo1992, please provide a bit more context down in the comments. We'll look out for it because you've hit an obscure piece of lore. Cetra! Oh, well, suddenly it all makes more sense. Thank you very much. Massively appreciated that you confirmed that one.
Also, what is MPD short for? Alan Nolex, I'd interview Be'lakor.
It's quite good one, actually.
Yeah, Be'lakor would be good. I feel like he would just ramble about himself the entire time. Super Orlock, what else have a natural birth cycle control cycle called Dryad?
You know what?
You joke, but that actually is noted in the lore that there is a
absolutely
thing there.
Is that. They don't control their birth cycles, and it was the Wood Elf position that made me go, I think my answer is that the High Elves do control their birth cycles, and that started things off in a different way. The Wood Elves in many respects have divested that to the forest, and they have children as and when required, where the High Elves have children as and when they choose to, because the High Elves ultimately are the stiff upper lip, I control everything type. They're the more political version, which is why I chose, for my version at least, for them to control it. Narcissistic personality, oh, definitely.
Yeah, and,
NPT, yeah.
That being said, Cetra, we don't have time to discuss this, but all I'll say is Cetra is a lot more devout than he might appear to be, but his expression of religion is very different than what you might expect. But anyway, all right, let's get in the intro, get through this really fast because there's a lot to talk about.
Have we actually done them all? You're kidding
me.
Oh,
okay, one last one came in. We touch on Alarielle's father is really... Yes, we will talk about that because technically the answer is provided, but it also doesn't make sense. So we'll get into it.
That's where it starts getting complicated, man. Yeah, Everqueens. Okay, I'm going to keep my introduction super short now because we are now 1 hour into our stream. So first, thank you all so much for all the super chats. Enormously appreciated. It is Valentine's Day and it is always nice to give hearts out to everyone. And we... as in Sotek and I, discussed what we were going to do for today. And my first thought, as in for Valentine's Day, was the Heart of Avalorn. Because the Heart of Avalorn for me was a super brilliant magical artifact that I loved all the way back in the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And it was first introduced to Tyrion as a gift that he had received from Alarielle, from her to represent her love, which he wore, the Heart of Avalorn, this great crystal ruby that sat upon his chest. But the lore for this particular piece slowly but surely adapted over the editions. And this became a representation of their love, but it also carried somewhat of a curse. In that, should he ever die, the heart would break because of Alarielle's love. and he would be reborn, but that heart would be broken. And I remember when I first read this little piece of lore going, oh, that's beautiful. They've built a little love story between these two figures, the Ever Queen of the elves and this leader of the Shining Host, who, by the way, is often called man killer because he is horrifying. So we've got Tyrion, this shining example of elf princedom, and we've got the Ever Queen. They love each other. They've got a symbol, and should it break, he goes fucking mad and no longer loves her anymore. She no longer loves him. There's a dark story in there. That'd be brilliant should it happen. Should it come, the end times become a thing. Love this. And you know me, I love my dark stories. I was like, yeah, this is great. This is proper high elf, over the top love. Because the elves, as we've discussed more than once, are super emotional, super over the top creatures. They don't just simply say, I love you. She encapsulates this love with the heart of Avalorn that she passes over, a representation of the realm that she leads, and says, if this should ever crack, we will be done forever. But I will have brought you back to life. You will not die that day. You will come back. And that's pretty fucking cool. And this representation of love for me, when we were discussing it, was, I thought, a great place to begin for our Valentine's episode. But now we come back to, now that we chose that, who the fuck is she anyway? Who is this Alarielle? Now, obviously, if you've played Total War, you've got a very strong opinion of our human with her pointy ears who can wander around, pick up the Sword of Cain, and kick living shit out of everybody a little bit too quickly. But if you haven't, what is the hoary tale? Now, I can go into this with some depth, but I'm not going to, because our time is tight. So instead, I'm going to sum it up with the following. She was introduced first in the 4th edition of the High Elf Army list. Alarielle, the Ever Queen. She was given no stats. She was considered to be much like the Phoenix King beyond the point of the game, because at this point in the 4th edition run, which was very near the beginning, the High Elf Army list, right at the beginning of the run, they didn't tend to stat the people at the top, except for maybe Karl Franz, because he was just human. The elves at the top, they went, are probably a bit too much. Teclis and Tyrion was in there. Tyrion, the good old Loremaster of all the White Tower of Safri, but they didn't put the Ever Queen or the Phoenix King in. They were beyond the battlefields. Then in later editions, they went, yeah, fuck that, no, we're bringing her in. And they did. And I remember when they first brought in her miniature. She's not in the 4th edition, is she? You're looking at it with things saying that she's in there. Are you saying that she's in the 4th edition of the army list? Is my
no, I'm looking at something else. I'm looking at something completely different.
Goodness. Suddenly I was like, is she in the 4th edition of the army list? Uh-oh. And the later one, she got pictured. I think it was Des Hanley who did the first picture of her. That's off the top of my head. I'm probably wrong. She got pictured in there with a long host of her handmaidens beside her. The very first time when she was pictured with her hand up, Alarielle, the Ever Queen, was marked. And they said, haha, these are her stats and these are her handmaidens. And I think 5th, might be 6th. And then she was included pretty much in every edition afterwards, although she did skip one edition because it was 6th that did all the skipping, so it was 6th as I recall. They didn't provide stats for her. And Alarielle is presented in somewhat of a scale creep each time. Starts off with her just being the Ever Queen, the chosen of Isha, the high priestess of Isha, if you will. And as time goes by, that changes. Particularly when we start moving into the novels, and particularly when we discuss Graham McNeil's work, where the Ever Queen moves from being a simple representation of Isha, a high queen, I suppose, or a high priestess, as elves, as humans might view things, to an avatar of Isha. She turns into a living representation of that goddess. And then it's quite clear that she turns into the equivalent of Anarion, who was, when he was the first Phoenix King, a representation of the Phoenix god, Azurin, who manifested through Anarion after he pleaded for the elves to be saved from the incoming tides of chaos, and Azurin manifested within this elf, changing everything, changing the tides of war. And it made clear that all of the Ever Queens had this. Not only this, but all of the Ever Queens could remember and provide the power of all of the previous Ever Queens when they become Ever Queen. This magic floods into them, and this happened to Alarielle. She became every other Ever Queen that came before them. And as this story develops, we realize that we have a character who is special. She is a character who can in one fashion or another, perhaps through ritual or through divine providence, sort of remember the cataclysm because it's from her royal line. The unbroken chain of Everqueens, all of whom are related to her, all the way back because it is handed down mother to child, mother to child, mother to daughter, I suppose. Somewhat like the Bene Gesserit. And they go through a ritual which basically means that the goddess is held within them, and in the circlet that she has around her hair, holding her hair, pardon me, is the memory of all of the previous Everqueens. Okay, right, so we've got a walking goddess. And then Graham McNeil dials down on this hard and says, yeah, and when she's having a bad mood, storms arise. When she's happy, plants just grow. When she is sad, everything goes dark. And when she nears death, the statue of the Everqueen down in Laverne goes dark. And no matter how much light you cast upon it, it goes dark. And should she die, plants across the world die also. When the Everqueen dies, entire forests start to crumble until a new Everqueen is put in place because she is the goddess on the planet now. She has become much more than just simply a basic avatar, as it had been in the first examples, to a living embodiment of that goddess's will on the planet. And it's marked in that book that she finds that a little bit tough to keep to terms with because she was originally just an elven girl from a royal line. And when she takes that on, the flood of magic that comes through her, the flood of the realization of what she is massively overwhelming. Okay, so that's fun. And I remember reading that going, well, holy shit, this is dialing up to Warhammer. Love it! Because this matched the background that had been described for Inarian and the elves and a whole bunch of other stuff, but had been ignored. And didn't really get proper detail until we hit the end times and we started popping up with a host of elven avatars that were kicking around out there. Gods who had manifested within elves. So what do we have? Trying to keep this introduction short. I'm going to keep this one under 10 minutes. So what do we have? I've cut out so much stuff I want to say. This is why this one's a bit disjointed. Super disjointed. What do we have? We have got the Elven Queen of Avalorn, which is one of the 10 kingdoms of the elves. The Elven Queen of Avalorn is the Everqueen also, who is the queen of all elves. She is the Everqueen with an unbroken line that spans back to pre-Cataclysm times, because in the original version of the elves, they were led by just a queen. That was it. They were a matrilineal line that ruled all elves, and they were directly tied to Isha. Something happens to the elves, and whether that's Isha was always a part of it or it came after Azuran, it's uncertain. But what happens after the arrival of Azuran is that they become a species with a king and a queen. And the Everqueen is ritualistically married to the Phoenix King, and they have at least one child. They must have one. They have one child who will be female, because elves can choose this shit regardless of what they may say elsewhere, or you could just claim that the goddess makes it so. They have at least one child. If they're in love, they might have multiples, because elves are fickle creatures. Love manifests in many different ways. They're not like humans. Marriages, because the king and queen are sort of married, comes in multiple forms. After they have had their child, they can then have a consort, or multiple consorts, 50 if they so choose. They can even appoint them as a special people in courts, whether it's the Phoenix King's court or the Everqueen's court. Consorts doing their thing, which is what Tyrion is to the Everqueen, her consort. And somewhat, I think, interestingly for our Valentine's themed one, they kind of just do it together, probably. I mean, the Everqueen might do her own thing on the side beside Tyrion, but Tyrion is very much dedicated to her. Unlike most elves, particularly high elves, who are all over the place, sleeping with literally anybody, as their whims desire, a bit often just fostering different political allegiances. Sex to them is a tool like any other. It's also something that allows escape, something that the elves, particularly the high elves, are known for, because they are somewhat indolent in comparison to the others. She is this great figure of the high elves, leading them all, but she's also more, because when she was a kid, she got into trouble more than once. And when she became Everqueen for the first time, she sees a lot of war, mostly with the Dark Elves. And she turns her head to something that most Everqueens don't previously. And this is the bit that I'm going to end with her. Our previous Everqueens were very much manifesting what is seen as feminine qualities. Great beauties, maternal, attached to nature and wilderness. They are the wood elf, almost representation of what you'd expect from an elven queen. Think of Titania or something similar from the real world. She manifests all of these as the elf queen. But no, she turns to war. Again and again and again. Because she was attacked and she's taken it pretty fucking personally because of the events of her life. And this means that the Everqueen, the last Everqueen that we will ever have, throughout the course of her life, goes to war again and again and again and again and again. She takes her handmaidens, all of whom are kick-ass motherfuckers, and she takes them to war with her again and again. She goes to war against demons, she goes to war against invaders, she goes to war against greenskins. If you name it, she goes to war against dark elves. You name it, she's given it a goddamn good go. To the point that Finubar, the Phoenix King, her very first husband, so to speak, who is supposed to be the representation of war and bringing about the great judgment of the elves upon the rest of the world, he's largely someone who sends the elves out to make friends in comparison to previous Phoenix Kings. And he's often sitting in Laverne doing fuck all in comparison to what she does. And there is seen to be this role reversal. I broke my 10 minutes. There seemed to be this idea that the Phoenix King, who is meant to represent male qualities as we stereotype them, has become, in some respects, far more the feminine figure. And the Everqueen has become the far more masculine figure, in that she has started to reach out and not just go to war, but conquer. And I think that makes for a super fascinating start for a character, particularly when you see how strongly influenced she is by Tyrion. Tyrion, who is a warlord, the leader of the shining host of the elves, arguably their best general. And, last note here, Tyrion looks identical to Anarion. He speaks with Anarion's voice. He is a younger version of their first ever Phoenix King, and ultimately her greatest grandfather on an unbroken line. Not by any generations back, I would like to say. And he is her consort, and the pair of them are different. They are in love, and it's quite clear he has, to put it nicely, rubbed off on her. And the experiences of her life and the strong influence of her personal consort have meant that we have an Everqueen who acts unlike any other Everqueen. She goes to war. The example of her that you get in Total War isn't wrong. She is a warlike individual, unlike all the other Everqueens, and arguably because of how her mother died. She is someone who is suffering from trauma, and that trauma has been fine-tuned by who she chooses as her consort. Tyrion, the ultimate killer of everything. Do not get it wrong. Tyrion is a giant of an elf who murders everything in his path. He is known for his bloodlust and his strong extremes, and that is her chosen lover. And that is what I'd like to end it on. Love. What does it mean between these eternal teenagers? This manifestation of a goddess that her moods change the world. You could argue that the reason that the Warhammer world goes boom is because she got upset and turned to war. So ultimately, you could argue that Chaos's great goal during the last incursion of Chaos was just to make her turn to war. So,
spicy.
That was a fun, interesting way to introduce the idea. It's obviously not the intro I was going to go through each of the editions like I planned, I generally do, but I just fumbled through all that and said, let's talk about the character. She is a warlike Everqueen who is the manifestation of the goddess of fertility, the source point of all elves, and has all the memories of all of the Everqueens all the way back to the very first one, probably before Alarielle, the first one that we have named. She has access to, through one route or another, how the elves first formed, and indeed it's marked into her background. She does know this shit. She knows the beginning of time. She knows that she was brought forth by the first divine spark of the gods, and that she has the same power. And that's fucking immense.
Yeah, there's oh man, there's so much to say about her. One of the things that's really interesting about Alarielle,
Where do we
and
start?
like Andy says, one of the things that's really fascinating about her in this war aspect, which actually does tie really well into her Age of Sigmar storyline as well, because the model that we have is literally the war aspect, which is not what she always was, but it's what she becomes after the end times .2 electric boogaloo. But in any event, the big thing with Alarielle is her power was not originally intended for destruction. It's not originally intended to war, but that's what she turns it towards. And to be fair, when she is strong, it is scary as fuck. Where there are
one detail before I forget it, just to make sure we discussed this earlier in the stream, but I want to make sure we get the detail out. She also is of the bloodline of Anarian, which I definitely said, but that means she carries the curse of Cain. All of the Everqueens carry the curse of Cain, and the High Elves don't talk about it. The true power without the curse of Cain is on the Phoenix King's side. It's not on the Everqueen side. So we have there even a potential justification for why the Phoenix King exists, to balance out the curse that now lies upon all elves because of the drawing of the Sword of Cain. It's a nasty one.
Yeah, that is actually a big thing worth pointing out, is that none of the Phoenix Kings have had the Curse of Cain except for the first one.
Yeah.
Because they're not direct descendants. Whereas the Everqueens all have the Curse of Cain, because they're all direct descendants.
Yeah. And the writers tend to forget that part.
Yeah, they absolutely do. But Alarielle's power is so extreme. Like, some of the feats that we have for her, like, there was literally a super juiced monstrous manticore, chimera, which is even worse, by the name of Blackfang, who came down from the Anuli Mountains. And this thing was so bad that, like, armies of elves were struggling to deal with it or to divert. It was basically like almost a Godzilla coming down off the mountains because it was so strong. It's actually
slightly worse if you go into the original part. It wasn't just that we had this gigantic chimera from hell from the Anuli Mountains, and if you don't know, there's a great big back of mountains and the great circular islands of the Althuin, where the High Elves are from, called the Anuli Mountains, and they get so much magic from the vortex of magic that was cast at the beginning of time to suck magic out of the world, that they get some pretty freaking astonishing monsters up there. And he comes down, and he doesn't just come down by himself. All other monsters in the area are attracted to him, and he ends up leading them. It's proper bonkers.
Yeah, and Alarielle is so busted that she faces off with Blackfang. And where Blackfang is a regenerating, unstoppable, mutated monstrosity, which chimeras are already fucking horrible normally, but he was so much bigger and worse than all the other ones. She kills him by touching him just once.
Because she is that goddess.
Yeah, Alarielle does not wield weapons. She doesn't wield a sword or blade or anything. Like, she has a staff that helps her channel magic, but she
she's often given a sword in some iterations.
Yeah, in the modern iterations and some of her older ones, she
had nothing in the oldest, and then she sort of did, and then they went, actually, maybe not.
Yeah, she just touches him. She walks up and she just touches him once, and it said that Blackfang literally erupts into a pillar of white purifying flame, and it cleanses everything he is, and he's just gone. And this happens again in the Sons of Aurelian series. If you go read that series, there's this big, horrible chaos champion that turns into a great chaos spawn, and Alarielle kills him with just a touch. Like, she can purify chaos or dark corruption out of existence by just touching something. If you were to put Alarielle up against Morgar, Alarielle would probably body Morgar by just touching him, because she just burns his corruption out of existence.
Yeah, she's let's be as blunt as we can be, especially given the time. I have no desire to go into long explanations as to why this is the case, but she is the goddess made manifest on the Warhammer world, and that comes with all of the power that entails. And that is all of life, all of the creative aspects of being the source of the High Elves. She is the goddess Isha, the goddess that created the High Elves and much of what many would perceive as the Warhammer world, at least in terms of High Elven legends. The ultimate divine creator of all things is Azurin. Azurin is the one who basically made it all happen, but Isha was responsible for the life. Isha was responsible for the elves, her favorite children, and she is the divine representation of not just this, but all life in the Warhammer world. I wasn't exaggerating when I say when she's in a good mood, the weather is better everywhere. The Warhammer world doesn't have proper physics playing here in the same way that the real world does. You fuck about with the weather in the real world and all sorts of crazy shit happens, as is almost certainly obvious to anyone who's a meteorologist. It's a very complicated thing. It's hard to predict the weather. In the Warhammer world, it's much easier to predict the weather. Go have a chat with the Everqueen. She in a good mood? Then great. All right, things are good.
Now, I'm going to grab the steering wheel and I'm going to take us hard, pivot hard, because we're going to get into the stuff that you're not going to find on any fucking novels or wikis or any other stuff, and start talking about some various things that have come up over the course of the chat. We've already talked a little bit about how the Curse of Cain is there. It's never addressed, but it's there. It is something that is plaguing all of the Everqueens. Another thing is, so one of the things the lore introduces that flat out doesn't make sense and ties back to this thing about Alarielle's dad. So Andy already mentioned this, of that, according to the lore, and this very quickly falls apart really fast, the Everqueens are supposed to be, and granted, this is one of those things that should have had more information because it would have been fascinating, of before an Aryan, the Everqueens could just choose their partners. There was no divine right of inheritance to make a ever child. It was just she chose a partner and her eldest daughter would become the new Everqueen. Because the Everqueens have been an unbroken line since forever, and I'm going to get into it. Since the elves
were first created. So arguably, the very first Everqueen is the very first elf.
Yeah, and I can actually prove that that's the case, because if you go read in her 8th edition rules, the Shield Stone of Aicha, which is one of her magic items, is quite literally said to have been created when the island of Ulthuan was created, and it was given to the first Everqueen. That means when the old ones raised up the island and did whatever fuckery resulted in the elves and the elven gods and all this stuff, that first ever generation, that first ever elf was given something so ancient, it goes back to our old ones, or our elven gods chat in a prior stream, where the old ones and the elven gods had to have interacted.
Yep. And not only that, it's almost certainly the root of the very rarely mentioned legend, although it's mentioned in 40k more, where after the gods are banished from the mortal plane, Isha continued to talk to her elves because she loved them so much, and it was through a crystal, that stone. She talked to the Everqueen, her favorite child. An Everqueen with an unbroken memory that goes back to Isha herself. Arguably, one of the primary reasons that they are so closely attuned to Isha is because they hold a lot of Isha's memories, because the first child of her was probably the first Everqueen, which means their mum is Isha. And that's a super fascinating route to take. She is the literal avatar of Isha.
Yeah, and it gets even crazier because her crown goes back to an Everqueen before the Phoenix King. Her staff goes back to the first Everqueen. Like, these are artifacts that have been passed down for beyond, and this isn't 10,000 years ago. This is well before 10,000 years ago. This is old shit. Like thousands of years before chaos is even a blink in the eye of the shit that's going to hit the northern and south poles. But all that to get back to this situation, this is an annoying question because the technical answer to who would Alarielle's father would be is Finnabar. Finnabar should be Alarielle's dad because he was the Phoenix King when she was born.
And that's where it begins to break down. And this is annoying, particularly from someone who has attempted to make the bloodline. Because the Everqueen is the child of the previous Phoenix King and Everqueen. That's it. That's the story. But every time you look at it, you go, wait, what? It doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. Or if it does make sense, there's not just some incest between the various Phoenix Kings and the Everqueens. There's a lot. And I do mean a lot. Where Phoenix Kings are having children with their own daughters. Because that is the only thing that makes sense of the strict rules that were put in place. And you can either accept that and say that that is what was put in place because elves are different to humans. They don't have the same issues with incest. And it's not just they don't culturally have the same issues. They don't literally physically have the same issues. They will not breed impure children, as many would put it if you had a child of incest. They will breed just pure elves because that's what they do, which means incest is not an issue for them at all in regards of at least the biology. That being the case, then, yeah, sure, that works. The Phoenix King is having kids with his daughters. They have a kid with the next Phoenix Queen, because the Phoenix Queen, pardon me, Ever Queen, because that's what the tradition is. Their first daughter will be the next Ever Queen, unless they should be killed and they have to make another one. It starts to fall apart the more you look at it.
Yeah, and so there's a fun thing that you just gonna have to wrestle with, but according to what GW's given us, that's what the answer is.
Yeah, if we go strictly with what it is, and I think that is worth being a good starting point. Her father is also the father of her child. Her first one, at least. And that's just what it is. That's just what it is. And if we go back, this happens multiple times because Ever Queens don't die on the same day as the Phoenix Kings.
Yeah, virtually never.
Almost never. Yeah. We have lots of stories as to when it happens, and they always fudge over it because nobody has written a new piece of lore to make sense of it. Now, it might come in an elf book, and if I was writing the elf book, it probably would, and not necessarily in a way that would make everyone happy, because I don't necessarily think the incest issue is as much of an issue for elves as it might be for others. But it's an issue that if it is the case, it has to be addressed. And that would be an interesting conversation with Games Workshop to have. Do you want incest? Because the answer is no. I have to write a different background to your existing background. I'd rather not fudge over it. I'd rather provide answers.
Yeah,
and that's the thing.
Like Andy said earlier, I think there could be an interesting story there, of especially if you go with the idea that if you take it from the Everqueen side, you make it an interesting story rather than the Phoenix King side, which is the way the army books kind of handled it, which is what makes it weird. It's that, the Phoenix King is so important that he has to have a child to be the next Everqueen, even though he's an elected official. And if you really, when you delve into the lore, he doesn't actually do what a Narian did to go through the flame. He's not an actual embodiment of Assuran. He's just an elected official. That's all the Phoenix King is. That's all he is. There's really genuinely nothing special about the Phoenix King. He
marries the current Everqueen, which means he will have married the previous Phoenix King's queen, because that's just how it happens.
Yeah, which is
lovely.
Which
messy.
When you actually look at it from a realistic sense, it should be taken from the Everqueen's perspective of, the king needs to marry the Everqueen because he's not that special. He needs to inherit a lot of his political authority and power from her through marriage. Now, I think we can build that story, and we can also justify why they don't use the Everqueen, because the Everqueen is a figure of not just some importance, extraordinary importance to the elves. But what happens when her entire line, because of the acts of the first Phoenix King, become tainted? Yeah, exactly.
So we can then immediately say, then we need to come up with a different method of recording time. So before that, it was the Everqueens that everything was recorded around, and after Anarian and his deeds, it was the Phoenix Kings. And in many respects, you can see why Malekith was very much voted out by the High Elves, because he carried the same taint.
Yeah, so that, of course, then ties into what we discussed earlier with Curse of Cain, so I'm not going to worry about that. But the idea that Andy introduced of, the Phoenix King is supposed to be the one that gives a child with her because he doesn't have the curse. He's a completely different family line. So once again, when taken from the Everqueen's perspective, you can make that story make sense. But anyway, all that to say,
I will add, if they did choose Malekith, though, well,
yeah. Now that
does be him and his sister.
Yeah, but
that's
who
elves, they would have chosen.
Yeah, for elves, they might look at that and go, what? Yeah,
so what? Exactly.
Now this also does add to the exactly. This does, of course, add to the interestingness about Alarielle in particular, because we know Alarielle is apparently the first Everqueen who breaks this tradition, where she doesn't have a child with Finnabar. She has a child with Tyrion, which would actually reinforce our Curse of Cain theory, because that means that Alarielle, her daughter, has the curse coming from both sides of the family. Both her father and her mother have the Curse of Cain, so she's doubled down, which would have been a really fascinating angle to take that story, and they didn't, kind of, sort of. It was a mess. We're not going to worry about the end times. But one of the things that would be interesting there to make Finnabar even more of a beloved from my perspective, Phoenix King, would be that I would be willing to bet all of the Dollarinos in the world that Finnabar knew.
Yeah.
And that Finnabar is, in some ways, was a force that pushed for that to happen for his own reasons, which would...
I don't know, push is necessary. I quite like the idea of him being not knowing, because the High Elves are so political, even this supposedly brilliant version of them.
That's true.
I quite like the idea of Alarielle potentially being the problem here. She bears the curse of Cain. We can't diminish this. We often diminish this, but she bears the curse of Cain. And if I was in a position where I was looking at all of these characters and looking at them, I would be going back over each one of those Everqueens and going, what was the manifestation of that curse? How did it come about? And her manifestation is Tyrion. That is the mess. That's where everything breaks, and she lies. She is a pure goddess, and no one would believe she ever lies. And she does, because she does something for her perfect elf, her perfect shining lord. She provides him with the child she never should have provided. In some respects, she's like Jessica in Dune, who did the thing she shouldn't have done. She went against all of her training, everything she's supposed to do, because she was in love. And the manifestation of the curse of Cain for Alarielle was love. And I think that's why it makes such a perfect Valentine's Day.
Yeah, that does make for a really good story. Okay, I'm going to grab some of these super chats real quick, because some of them are piling up a bit.
So let's dive through them all.
Why is Aliathra blind? I am 90% sure she's not, unless I am just forgetting a really...
I don't remember her being blind. I am feeling...
Yeah,
I'm missing something. God damn it. Is she blind?
I don't think she is, but if there's a direct part where that's mentioned, let me know, Stellar. But is it because of the Curse of Cain? Is it because she is an oracle? Also, if the world didn't end, what would be the consequences of an Everqueen with the Curse of Cain? So as we talked about, all the Everqueens have the Curse of Cain. That is something the end times just completely fucked up, was 100%. Saying that, Aliathra has the Curse of Cain because of Tyrion. No, she'd have it because all of the Everqueens.
Both sides. Yeah, totally.
That being said, if you know where it directly says that, please do let me know, because that would actually be really interesting.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know this part, which means if it's there, I've missed it. And if I was answering this one, I would say almost certainly because she's a seer, and because she's not going to be the goddess to come, because she is not the child of the Phoenix King and the goddess. I would fuck it up a little bit there. She's effectively a living embodiment of the goddess's will, rather than a living embodiment of the goddess, which I think would be a super fun route to take.
Vault Boy, take this offering. Thank you very much, all-knowing lore gods.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. Lushar Chris, Tyrion, I love a woman who could kick ass. Well, yeah, I mean, Tyrion would be insanely in love with her abilities, especially because she actually saves his ass a couple times.
Yeah, totally.
Psych, wouldn't her warmongering corrupt her reincarnations ever after? That is an argument. I would say no, but it would be just the manifestation.
That's a very mortal way of viewing it, Psych. She is the living embodiment of a goddess, and Isha has always been angry. Always. It is a part of that goddess's character. She had never liked what happened with the elves. She didn't like being separated from them. The warmongering aspect is that any who would cross her children is a core component of the character, which is brought into balance in many respects by a host of things that happen in the Warhammer world. This is not a bad reflection of what Isha could be, the great life-giving powers that she has, because it's generally done in what would be from the outside a very positive way. She is cleansing things. She is resolving things back to what they should be. She is bringing balance to the disordered and the chaotic. It's just normally the war is led by the Phoenix King. And previous to that, whatever war was in place kind of didn't really have an Everqueen ruler doing it. It's probably some prince or another, or some warlord or another that did all of that stuff. But later on, it becomes the Phoenix King. And Arian manifests this role, and all Phoenix Kings after kind of manifest it also. She does not lead, but she turns into a figure that is a core component of pushing towards war. And this is something that causes a lot of the High Elves actual problems, because they think that this is not what she should be doing, but she's Alarielle. Who's to say no to her?
Yeah, Watchdog 3079. Off topic, what do you think gave Tyrion the title Manslayer? If I remember right, I think Bill King actually answers this question in the second book, Sword of Caliber, because there's a scene where he's on a boat with a bunch of humans, and there's a reference to it. But if I recall correctly, the big thing is Tyrion has a temper. And I don't remember the exact specifics, but there's an incident where some humans say something to him, and he just loses his shit, and he kills the fuck out of a bunch of them.
Yeah, for me, I don't know why, but I've got a half-baked memory of the Norse as well, where he did a campaign up there. But that doesn't really matter. I'm going to, Watchdog, take your question slightly differently and say that most of his titles, most of which are the great killer of other peoples, and many of the other peoples around the world, whether they're Dark Elves, Skaven, whatever, all have names for Tyrion, because he's fucking terrifying, and he has gone to war with most of them in his time. And I would put most on there. I'd put the Empire, Bretonia, everything else on there, because Tyrion is a world-wandering killer. And he leads the elves to victory wherever he goes. There is a reason he is so well liked and feared by the High Elves, and why he is so feared by the other factions. It's because he is a killer, which is, I think, fascinating when you view that this is the Everqueen's chosen one.
Yep. Psych, Alarielle versus Morgar. Alarielle would put Morgar in a dumpster can.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the case, because Morgar is, although a manifestation of a god, also a slightly more distant version of that, and quite killable. Now, obviously, she's killable too, but I think the core components of her powers are the eradication and the cleansing of entities like him. So I think this would be one of those big ones where they hit, combine, and ultimately she'd win over, but possibly tainted forever for it, because as is often the case in Warhammer, there's always a consequence to doing something that's big, even a consequence for doing something that's small sometimes. So probably a story is waiting to be told there, should they have ever met. But Morgar would be after her hard.
Yeah, you actually see this essentially represented in Ariel versus Morgar. It's a very similar set of powers going up against him, and she does beat him, but it costs her a lot every time she does.
And Ariel is another manifestation of Isha, but a very different type. And this is where we get the clear difference between, say, Ariel and what she did, and what, say, for example, Alarielle would do and what she does, between the avatar of a god and whatever the fuck Ariel is. They are very different in their manifestations.
Yep. Think Matter, Dark Deeds Fire Gang chiming in. Looking forward to getting positively wasted and playing the entire game in character. Nice.
So, if you didn't know, we played that game in character in Lorehammer as well. You can literally watch us playing it as our characters in one of our streams, which is super fun. And also, since we're Dark Deeding, I am so pouring the last of this bit in here. Nice.
Silent the Emperor, what if suggestion? What if Ariel had killed Morathi instead of sparing her in exchange for learning the secrets of Dar? That would have been an interesting spiral of events. That might be a fun one.
I would be really interested in seeing that play out, but I personally think that in many respects undermines Morathi's core character component, which is she can persuade anyone to anything. So you would have to have a really good story to make that one work, because it undermines a core component of what Morathi is. Having said that, though, many of Morathi's own stories undermine who Morathi is.
Necromancer Cobalt, the Everqueens all have the Curse of Cain, so her obsession with the sword could be canon. Sort of joking, but not entirely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is 100% acceptable as canon. 100%. I don't think that's weird.
I think you could actually write an interesting story about one of the Everqueens being drawn to the sword and the elves having to realize the Everqueens cannot go to the Blighted Isle. They cannot.
Her ultimate grandfather wielded that sword. It's her right, just like it's Tyrion's right. That blade is hers. That staff, as she almost certainly views it, is hers. She views it in the same way probably as Malekith, as a great staff. Although, if you really want to make her warlike, she views it as a blade like an Aryan did. Because I very much think she probably does. It would be the step between her moving from simply being Isha to being Isha and an Aryan in one. And Azure in one. Cain in one. Holy shit. Yeah. Too many gods.
Too many gods.
So, yeah, that'd be super fun.
Hey, man, Sweet Home, Otho, Alabama. Yeah, very true. Wow. I imagine you're having fun with this one. Sean Phillips, an interaction between Ariel and Alarielle would actually be probably a genuinely interesting and in many ways uncomfortable discussion. I think this is a good moment to take a moment to talk about.
Yeah, let's dive into this. We're going to have to do it at some point, Sean. So why not with your one? It's a good question.
There are two big things I want to point out about them before we really get into this, which is that the biggest difference that I find super interesting between Alarielle and Ariel are that from everything we know about Ariel, Ariel is an incarnation of Aisha that does not have the Curse of Cain. She is not a descendant of any of Anarian's line. The second thing is that where Alarielle as Aisha, her romantic counterpart is either Cain or Ashurin. For Ariel, it's Kurnos.
Yeah.
Which you may go, is that a big deal? Yes, it's a huge fucking deal. Because of who Kurnos is.
I'll add another big difference. Ariel is directly attached to the wood. And I do mean she's attached to the wood. Athel Loren, in particular, the divine spark that lies at the heart of Athel Loren. Alarielle is attached to the world. She's not attached to one piece of the world. She is the divine creation of all life in the world. And almost every species, bar the dwarves, is directly influenced by her. That is something so different to Ariel that it can barely even be compared. If you look at how she is described, Alarielle is the goddess. Ariel is not. Ariel is a spirit of the wood, is the divine spirit of Isha within the wood, is as completely tied up with the wood as Orion, who's rebirthing and rebirthing and rebirthing in a host of weird woody ways that absolutely aren't Kurnos. It's the divine aspect of Kurnos within the wood. I would argue that Ariel is not an avatar, and is not an avatar by the definitions of what the avatar means whenever we see that avatar popping up, because she is a spirit of the wood. She is a spirit of the divine incarnation of Isha within the wood, but she is not Isha herself. Where on the other side, she's got giant butterfly wings. She's mental. Where on the other side, we have someone who absolutely is, just is, and always has been, all the way back to the first ever queens. Now, we have a potential story beat where you could argue that before Anarian there was never an avatar, and I think that possibly that could be argued, because the elven gods could then possibly walk the world before then, so they don't need avatars per se. The original ever queens didn't need to manifest a goddess, because the goddess was there, sitting on the throne. The ever queen was Isha. But then she leaves the world, and she manifests instead through the Everqueens that come afterwards. So there's clearly something going on there. But I would argue that here we would have a true incarnation of a goddess meeting an incarnation of the divine spark of the wood. And that feels different, both in terms of how they manifest, because Ariel is described as working through the wood and very much being influenced by the wood, where Alarielle is described as influencing the world. Every elf across the world is tied to her. When she dies, darkness falls on every elf's face. That won't happen if Ariel dies.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to point out here that's really, really interesting. And granted, a lot of this I'm not going to be able to get too into because it would be more appropriate in an Ariel focused stream. But one of the things that's really important is that the Wood Elves are very obsessed with like the concept of the weave, which is a very difficult to describe thing that kind of is like the balance of nature around the world. But it's the Wood Elves are exerting an influence on it and trying to maintain it in balance as an outside force, as opposed to being a manifestation of that force, because they are very directly tied into it. And like Andy said, Ariel, we have genuine examples, even in literally in the 8th edition Wood Elf book, where Ariel knows Alarielle cannot be allowed to die until she has an heir. And when she doesn't have an heir, Ariel gets involved to make sure she doesn't die. Yeah, Ariel is watching Alarielle. And Ariel is like way fucking older than Alarielle is, and is very, very scary, but she's different. Which is weird, but the best way I can describe it is, like Andy said, I agree wholeheartedly that Alarielle is the genuine article. Ariel and Orion are weird, but, and once again, this isn't the focus of this stream, so I'm not going to delve deep into this. The big thing that I would be asking is not how are there two of them. It would be asking why, when these two elves ascended to become greater spirits of the forest, did Kurnos and Aisha get involved.
It's a weird one.
Yeah. Which, and the other thing that's interesting is, for those that don't know, in the
it's
actual,
a very end times thing, so I'm often along the lines of,
the other thing I'll note that is interesting is that when you're dealing with the gods and who Aisha took as her lover, who is the father of the elves, it's Kurnos. It's not Ashurin, it's not Cain. Kurnos is her actual husband, her actual lover that she runs away with.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that we have something very interesting here. We have Alarielle, who is the divine manifestation of Isha. Possibly cannot be anything but, because of who she is, where she was born, her bloodline, everything else. And the other one, who in many respects more accurately represents the character, and ultimately a corruptible character, because Alarielle is, regardless of the fact that she carries the curse of Cain, which is going to obviously bring some form of flaw, is incorruptible. She doesn't fall to chaos, can't fall to dark magic. She is pure spirituality and light, and even though she's a bit of a warmonger in comparison to the previous ones, is still a warmonger along a very purposeful route of purity, upon cleansing, where Alarielle, in comparison to Ariel, is bounteously wonderful. Ariel's broken to her core. She is corrupted. She has taken on dark magic, taken on all manner of stuff in a very mortal way. She is far more like an entity with a real character that sits very much inside her soul, rather than Alarielle, who is fighting to be herself. She is described as finding it hard to be an individual because she has the memories of her previous lives almost. And that's the previous Everqueens, and arguably all the way back to the goddess herself, because she manifests that power within her. She has lost herself in a way that Ariel hasn't. Ariel's an individual, very much an individual, with the power of the wood steeped within her, and arguably thus closer to the original goddess than this entity, because Alarielle is close to being an entity. When she steps off her throne and she's not surrounded by the great wondrous thing that she is, and she tries to be elf, not god, and in touch with Tyrion, her lover, it's her few soft moments, her tender moments where she can be real and not this enormous goddess. Tyrion represents a lot, and sadly he is a warmonger. No matter how tender he may be at certain points, he is a warmonger who believes in destroying anything that gives danger to the elves of Ulthuan.
Yep, and if you want to know more about that, then when Ariel comes up as a potential voting option, you should vote for it.
Yeah, damn straight. Ariel will be a really fun one, I think.
Yeah, Vault Boy 1300. Having kids with blood relatives, very Sterling coded. No, that's the sheep. Finnebar should have killed Tyrion for stealing her. I don't. So
no, I think that's a very human, possessive way of viewing it. Elves are not human, and they do not possess each other. There is only one person who can decide who the Everqueen is going to be with. That's the Everqueen. The Phoenix King has nothing to do with that at all. Elves aren't so possessive. That's a very human way of viewing it. Finnebar doesn't have those sort of connections, while simultaneously they're teenagers. So for all he doesn't own or possess, he can very much get jealous in a variety of other ways, but it would be ultimately utterly unjustified. It would be culturally wrong to do this. And I think that's where a super cool story potentially lies. It would be a very different route, but ultimately potentially the same loose outcome. But I don't think that this, given Finnebar's character, would be something that would be strongly his way of doing it. He is ultimately someone who is caught up with the idea of reaching outwards. He is more of a diplomat. He is more of a mariner who moves from one place to the next. He looks at the horizon and beyond. He doesn't look at the petty moments of today. Finnebar is a very different type of man to, say, Tyrion, who literally sees the bloodshed over the horizon.
Yeah, Tyrion would be the kind of person to kill over jealousy. I don't think that's something Finnebar
absolutely would. Tyrion would be the one who very possibly, it's very possible that he would be the one to try and kill Finnebar, should Finnebar make moves in what he considers to be his, because Tyrion is really broken. He's this perfect prince. He looks beautiful. He's enormously tall. He's the most impressive warrior that the elves have. He's a living embodiment of an Aryan. He looks exactly like him. He sounds like him. He's astonishing, but he's broken.
And what's very interesting about Tyrion is that Tyrion is this is always my favorite thing about Tyrion is they always say Tyrion is monogamous, which is considered very weird by elf standards. He has one lover. He loves Alarielle. He loves no one else. And for elves, that is considered odd. Like, very odd.
Yeah, totally. If you want to see the curse of Cain and Tyrion, it's his pride, it's his character, it's all the things that lie underneath
obsession.
it all. Where if you flip this over on Teclis, the curse of Cain is made manifest physically. Where mentally, arguably, he's the far more sound of the two, but he has been the subject of taunting for all of his existence by his peers because they think he's broken and should never have lived. He is a living embodiment of the curse of Cain, and they fail to realize how much Tyrion is much more of a danger.
Yes. Is anyone not broken in Warhammer? Well, no, then it wouldn't be Warhammer.
Totally. It's Warhammer. Yeah, totally.
Watchdog, what if the Everchild became the avatar of Cain in the end times? That could have been a potentially interesting storyline. They could have taken in a very far, but that would have been like a next generation type situation, which obviously we never would have gotten to.
I sort of, and I know I shouldn't say this because I do love Warhammer to its core, but I sort of hate the Everchild as a concept, while simultaneously in my head going, no, it's brilliant, because it's just a term that's been translated shittily. It's been translated shittily from the L3E original, and the L3E original is basically, this is the scion of the holy royal line of Avalon. This is the princess-to-be who is going to become a god. She is enormously important, and she bears all of that responsibility in her training. Much like Alarielle was separated from her mother and her sister from birth for fear that they might get attacked in one place and they'd both die. So she didn't know her mother. She didn't know her sister. She has been separated for fear her entire life, and that is represented in her character later, where she hates that her life has been this because of the dangers from outside, which is one of the reasons why she isn't so peaceable as some of the previous ones. It's encoded into her character that she can see that there are better ways of doing it than had been done to her. She didn't know her sister. Her sister died elsewhere. Her mother died elsewhere. They only ever saw each other at a ritual, like once every blue moon. So we have a super cool character setup, and the Everchild, as stupid as it is as a name, is absolutely fitting for the whole position that they've made.
It just needs a better name.
It just needs a better name. And the idea that there would probably be several of them, because they would look to have multiple daughters if they possibly could, if they were being clever from the Phoenix King.
Yeah, an insurance policy. Yeah.
An insurance policy. And now we have a question as to when do they ascend? Because if they don't become the Everqueen at the death of the previous Phoenix King, then we have Everqueens who might go through multiple Phoenix Kings. Which means that they are having children with multiple Phoenix Kings. And which one becomes the Everqueen? Is it the previous Phoenix King? The Phoenix King before that? The Phoenix King before that? The Everqueen literally makes no sense the more you look at it, because they've missed out the fact that the Phoenix King isn't a human king and the Everqueen isn't a human queen, and they die after 50 years. It's just how it goes. They die quick. Some of them could live for thousands of years, and it's very poorly understood in terms of exactly how many years. We do, however, have the number of generations that Astariel has all the way down to Alarielle. So we do know how many there have been. I think it's 13 off the top of my head, might be 12, can't recall. It's somewhere around. I've got it in my own bloodlines that I built. And it's quite a number. And it's not the same number as there. I think it's exactly the same number as there is Phoenix Kings, because that's just how they've done it.
Yeah, which is silly. It shouldn't be. But
it's a bit of a mess.
Yeah, and it also would open up a lot of really interesting question of that one of the things that should have been that Bill King did a great job on dialing in on, but I would have loved the army books and stuff to do more dialing in on, is the High Elves consuming fear of every time an Everqueen dies. Because Everqueens are not going to die naturally. They're going to die through violence or some other method. And like, I love that Bill King.
And when they die, it's bad.
William King took that initial story of when Astariel is killed by Nakari. And the High Elves, for them, this was such a shock of, it was believed that her children died with her. Of course, we know they didn't, that Morelli and Yvraine survived because they were whisked away by Durthu. But as far as the elves knew, they were all killed because they were in the same place. And you see the elves being like, that could never be allowed to happen again.
The end of the world.
of, making sure that the daughters are not allowed to be kept with their mothers. That way they're not in the same place. It's a safety protocol. But exploring, there's a consequence to this. And one of the things that would have been nice to see is like how each of the Everqueens died and the high elves instituting more and more security policies, but it comes at the cost of the actual person of the Everqueen.
And eventually, Alarielle, the last of them, breaks. Yeah. She just breaks. And she's in a position where she can make decisions. She's the fucking Everqueen. And she's in a position where she can go against everything that tradition says she must do. Tradition says she sits on the throne in Avalorn and moves from place to place with the traveling court. She has her silks, she has her handmaidens, she has her protection around her at all times, and she lives a life of entire indolence, sex, parties, happiness, wine, living as a perfect representation of life, going through the cycles of life in Avalorn. That's what she's supposed to do. But she keeps on leaving Avalorn. And she does it again and again and again, which is not what she's supposed to do. But who's going to stop her? She's the fucking Everqueen. No one can stop her.
She goes to war. She gets so, like, you could argue almost inspired, or like, we talked about inspired or influenced by Tyrion, where she's like, this is the right thing to do. I need to fight for Ulthuan. I need to protect the land. Alarielle, one of the things that we see a lot with her is she is keenly aware of the fact, and one of the things that's very, once again, to show how much of a god she genuinely is, Alarielle's power is directly tied to Ulthuan in the world. When chaos is on the ascendant, the Everqueen gets genuinely weaker. She starts fading. One of the things that's noted is that when Nakari comes upon Alarielle and Tyrion when they're running away, Tyrion's been poisoned by a witch elf blade. He's dying. She can't heal him. That normally should be a pretty easy thing for the Everqueen to do. Now, granted, she's a new Everqueen, but at this point,
shouldn't make any difference.
It shouldn't make a huge difference, but she can't because Ulthuan itself is so sickly. Because of this big invasion, and there's like greater demons, all sorts of nasty shit running around. She just can't do it. You actually see this really nicely showed in the Sons of Aurelian series, because it's a duology. And the Sons of Aurelian shows us Alarielle as her power dips, and she gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And then there's a turning point where she is able to resecure her power, and she walks up to a full-on champion of Celeste and basically flicks him in the face, and he dies. And it's this fascinating show of that she's a goddess, but that actually comes with a really fascinating weakness, which is the land itself. She is so tied to the world that when, in many ways, there's this really spooky aspect of when she needs her power the most, it is the least likely to be available, which may also explain why she has such an aggressive mindset. She knows this. She knows that if she just waits until the enemy comes to her, she's fucked.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to add something that a lot of you might not have thought about, because originally with the story of Teclis, Tyrion, and Alarielle, they were all young. And they were almost like the next generation. Hey, here come the next gen of kids. They're doing stuff while the old elves are dying et al. The next generation comes in and they save the day. It's not the case here. Come the Great War against Chaos, Alarielle is young. She's like 40 or something. She's basically a child. And that's when Tyrion, who in the modern version is hundreds of years old, picks her up. Okay, so if you want to see something that's really icky, here's our next icky. It's not just the incest. It's the fact that he is centuries old and she is the equivalent of about a 14-year-old. She is super young. She's as young as Malekith was when they presented him to become the next Phoenix King. He's basically a child, and they bring him forward. He's almost a grown adult elf. Adult elves tend to be about 50. Okay, she's young, super, super young. And Tyrion takes her under his wing, and they become lovers. And he becomes her consort a little bit later when she's fully in her power, but her consort. And if you want to take a modern view, she's groomed. And she becomes something quite unlike any Everqueen before because of this. And that is just as potentially icky. And the writers totally didn't realize how young she was. When they wrote her, they just didn't realize she was the speck of a child when she was rescued by Tyrion. She was a speck of a child when they first met, when they were first doing their thing. And then when post the whole horror of the Great Storm Against Chaos, she is still a child. Tiny. And this is forgotten completely because they often think in human terms. They just go, oh, she's like 30, she's 40. Forgetting that's like, oh, she's 15, she's 16. She's proper young. And this is not reflected at all in the background, but it kind of is because they've got dates on it all. And they aged Tyrion up significantly in later versions, meaning that at this point, he's around about 400. At this point, he is a proper, mature elf. And she's a child. And that is what becomes the great relationship of the High Elf courts in many respects. And you can completely see how she, in her position of, let's be honest, a position of almost hero worship for this shining god of a man. And she has a child with him, rather than the Phoenix King, and breaks that line. I can completely see that. This is a broken story with all sorts of horrors in it, and I think it's a good one. And I think it's a better one when you view it for how horrible it is. And I do mean that quite literally in terms of how we view this with our modern sensibilities.
Yeah,
she is a child married off to a prince who is much older than her, and in many respects, almost certainly controlling her, even if it's just how she desperately wants to get his approval, because she is so young and she is so in love with him.
Yeah, I think this actually does a really good job of another one of the things Games Workshop unfortunately isn't the best at, which is demonstrating how unique elves are compared to humans, of how extreme their emotions are, and how it dominates them to such a ridiculous extent where a mature human would look at that and go, okay, y'all need to dial back the passion and make some actually smart decisions. Like, y'all need to calm the fuck down. Elves can't. They literally can't. Without like throwing themselves into a path that allows them to super focus. And you might listen to this and go, oh, well, this is a very unflattering view of Tyrion. But I think it gives such Tyrion should have he should have unflattering angles to him. You know, one of the things that Games Workshop fucked up leading into the end times, which is really annoying, is that they had a bad habit of wanting Tyrion to be a paragon while also trying to set up him falling to Cain. Yeah. And they fucked up setting him up where it's written. If you actually read it, the lore explicitly points out that he has some really bad flaws, but a lot of the time it just kind of it's just sort of thrown into the background and not really explored that well. Whereas with this storyline, you go, oh, this is a problem. And the thing is it helps tie him back to he's an Aryan. Where if you look at the relationship between an Aryan and Marathi, there are some problems with the relationship between an Aryan and Marathi.
And I think that if you're wanting to delve into this with any greater depth, we're going to be doing so on Wednesday when we discuss what happens if an Aryan lives, because the relationship with an Aryan Marathi is ultimately a massive one that he will constantly say, I'm this is bad for me, this is what I shouldn't have done. He is utterly head over heels in love, so in love that all of her flaws he sees, he talks about them and says, this is bad for me, but nevertheless keeps going forward. He is so in over his head, massively so. Marathi is such an important key figure to this entire bloodline, which is also going to be a key component to how we discuss what happens if an Aryan lives and is left with Marathi at his side.
Wednesday is going to be nuts.
It's going to be a nut stream this Wednesday. So yeah, do turn up at 10 p.m. UK time, whatever your local time is. I'm going to guess, what was that, 4 p.m. for you?
Yeah, 4 p.m. CST.
Oh yeah, 4 p.m. CST. I always remembered it. 11 p.m. PST, I think. I'm just guessing here. So yeah, it's going to be a super nuts stream, but I think that what we perceive as super nuts there is also super nuts in the story that they didn't realize they were telling of Tyrion, Alarielle, Teclis as well. Teclis, who looks on in their relationship and almost certainly has views. But Tyrion is perfect. Tyrion is perfect to everybody but Teclis. And when they're all saying he's got the blood of an Aryan, we should try and do something, they never do, because he's perfect. They all think he's just this shining god of a man, and Teclis is looking on broken at the side, coughing away because his body's wasted. drawing upon magic just to stand going, my brother's broken in his soul and I know it. And this, what they're all lauding, how has he convinced them that this is acceptable? Holy fuck, hack. Things are not going so well. Oops.
Almost like Teclis puts his faith in humanity because he realizes there's something very wrong back in Ulthuan.
Really wrong at the heart of the elves. And at the heart of the elves, there's all manner of political broken. And it's really nice to look at the tales for what they are, rather than necessarily the novels and the stories that we're told, because those novels are often just told purely from the perspective of Tyrion's a hero, Alarielle's a hero, let's do hero stuff with them. And then you look at it between the lines and go, wait a minute, she's the equivalent of a 12-year-old at this point. What the fuck?
Yeah, and you can see how it would get so heavily romanticized by the elves, especially over the course of the next 200 years.
Totally. But don't think of this as weird, because Romeo and Juliet, that's kind of the same, except they're both kids. So think this is not unnormal for historical relationships. I am in no way saying that this is bad. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying this is a really cool tale. It's just that the writers haven't realized what they're writing.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with royal figures. Psych could be that the ascension of the previous Everqueens have the curse purged by becoming. Could be that the ascension of the previous Everqueens have the curse purged by becoming an avatar of Aisha, and she's sort of the polar opposite of Cain. That could be an argument you could take.
Yeah, that could be. In fact, Psych, I think that's a good argument. That the curse is there, and that's one of the reasons why they kind of lose their character. And the curse is when their character comes through, which means the curse is never removed per se. It's just when they're at their most elf, when she is her true self, it comes out. In the same way that I wouldn't suggest that anything that Tyrion is doing, because he's cursed also, is from his perspective negative. He's not some great, manipulator of the Everqueen. He's in love. He's in love, admittedly, with what is effectively a child, but she's also a goddess. She's much more than simply a child, and he is in love. She is the most beautiful woman in the world. There is only said to be one woman in the entirety of the world who's arguably more beautiful, and that's Marathi. And this is written in more than one place. This is a core concept of her character. She is beautiful, and he's in love. And he doesn't think that he's a groomer. He doesn't think he's manipulating her. He thinks he's in love and doing things that people in love do. Externally, people could look on in that and say, dude, you should be in prison, particularly if we go with modern views. If it was today, with modern views, and we scaled him into human ages, he'd go to jail. Because what he's doing is wrong. But this is not the modern world. This is a fantasy world with a completely different set of ethics, with a completely different species who manifest in different ways, and she's a freaking god. So there's clearly a different relationship going on here. And Tyrion doesn't think he's a bad guy. If he was that guy, if he was manipulative, then he would never be the one that was the shining, perfect prince. He's not that. He believes he's as perfect as he manifests to everyone else. It's pretty much only Teclis who pretty much sees through it all.
The important thing with Tyrion is that he's not like a Machiavellian evil guy. It's that he's so ruled by his passions. He's so ruled. But that's also what makes him so fucking deadly, is that his anger gets to him. His passion gets to him. And he literally just can't control himself.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it's one that I feel could make an astonishingly powerful novel, but it's not one that Games Workshop would probably release because it would be so massively problematic that they would get complaints everywhere. It would make George R.R. Martin, look relatively staid and conventional if you really dialed home both how massively emotional and over the top they are, and also the nature of their relationships and how they manifest. It would be much more sexual and psychosexual and a whole host of other things
than most Warhammer novels
will ever reach.
The marketing department would have issues with us.
Yeah, totally. Massive issues. But nevertheless, we can look between the lines at the story that is actually there and go, well, this is interesting. It's a big problematic story, and that manifests the curse of Cain beautifully.
Yep. Ian O'Brien, I think the interesting interaction is that Cain probably knew that Aliathar was his big chance to affect Aisha's line without Assurance blood. Whatever his blessing would be, I imagine it would be subtle. Well, assuming that Cain has any... I think that makes Cain a little too...
It's not Cain, it's his sword.
Yes.
And there's a couple of things that's worth saying here. This is a cursed blade. This is a blade that was made by Vol. This is a blade that was made for Cain by Vol. And it carries a host of bad in it. And possibly not because of Cain. It was cursed for Cain. Because of all the terrible things that Cain was doing and when he wielded it.
There actually is a very good story that y'all don't understand how much Vol fucking hates Cain, because Cain
hates him.
Cain mutilated him. Vol is deeply crippled because of Cain. So the idea that Vol
him to his frickin' forge.
Yeah, the idea that Vol snuck a curse into the blade that fucked Cain up, and anyone else who would ever draw the blade works out beautifully.
Absolutely. We have no proof that the sword of Cain in any way manifests anything other than Cain's anger, horror, whatever else when he was wielding it, which could easily have been brought about by the blade itself. He is Kahela Mencha Cain, the bloody-handed god, and he did all manner of horrors when he was still walking the Warhammer world. And one of those horrors was what he did to Vol, and the blade that he carries was given to him by Vol as part of one of those epic tales from the past. So I would say the Curse of Cain is not necessarily anything to do with Cain's direct will at all. The power that's held within that blade could arguably be placed anywhere else. But I will, Ian, also support what you're saying. It could also be that Cain is now mad and Cain is this. Cain is just this pure entity of the warfare that he manifests, the murder that lies in his heart, and it does manifest through this blade. I think that can be easily argued too. But I think Warhammer is often at its best when you don't know the answer and that it could be multiple things. And in this case, I think it's probably not Cain's will, although you could argue that anyone carrying that blade, it absolutely manifests Cain's might on the battlefield.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add is I agree that Aliathra's story was deeply fucked up, and I'm really sad it got wasted because her story should have been fascinating because of the double up of she actually represents something that the world will have never seen before, where both of her parents had the curse. That's never happened before. So that I think it would have been fascinating to go a little further with that storyline. Sadly, we didn't get it.
Yeah, I agree. I think she should have been key to the end of the world, as is often the case with these stories. But I don't think the way that you used her was in any way a good representation of why she should have been key for the end of the world.
Evan, I'm not going to read this, but I will thank you for emulating good old Kellogg. If you ever want to read about a fucked up person, go look up the guy who founded the Kellogg cereal company. Dude was whack.
Yeah, he was pretty whack.
Michael S. I am not going to try your last name, but thank you, Michael. Could the Everqueen have children before she inherited the position? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably quite likely that some of them may have, but probably shouldn't have. Because elves are very sexual creatures. If they did, it almost certainly probably would have been for love because they fell in love with someone. But given the way that they describe Alarielle's upbringing, she was isolated, looked after by her aunt, as I recall, and completely taken away from all of the other elves, probably so this couldn't happen. I think it's quite likely that she is a manifestation of the mistakes of the past. And they have turned her into, because of this, someone who is frustrated, completely caged, completely isolated. And by the time she comes to the throne, I would argue that Tyrion has influenced her in such a fashion that she's no longer the sort of Everqueen that the elves wanted. So she has become something different.
I want to add two really interesting things here. A, that would imply a really interesting story of a time that this did happen and it caused problems.
Yeah,
where an Everqueen,
I think so too.
She had children for love, and then the time came where she became Everqueen, and there was the issue of, well, what do we do with her like eldest daughter, who is not, or she was supposed to only have sons, but maybe her partner gets jealous of the Phoenix King, that caused problems, or maybe the Phoenix King was jealous of her children, that caused problems, all sorts of things. The other thing I'll note is this also adds even more to the tragedy and kind of fucked upness of Alarielle and Tyrion, because Tyrion may have been the first man that she was ever close to in any way, like someone that's been repressed, your classic Catholic schoolgirl and all-girls school thing, let out on the world for the first time, and shit gets weird.
And your first love.
Your first love is
intense, particularly when you're a teenager and she's a teenager of the species of teenagers. So it's like intense redoubled upon intense. It's a proper passion, and arguably too strong a passion, that is being seen through and then reinforced by the arrival of a goddess. It's a beautiful situation. I'm really glad that it exists, but I don't think the writers have necessarily understood what they've made.
Super Orlok, the moral representative of Aisha and King lying together willingly, is weird metaphysically.
Yeah, it's interesting, particularly because Isha and Kane did not get on at all. Under any representation of them in any story where they are, she has been in some stories captured by Kane. Kane and Kurnus, Isha and Kurnus were both captured by Kane to get his own way. And that eventually led to Vol being captured. There's all manner of silly stories. But yeah, this is interesting. And I think, again, is a story that's not properly plumbed.
Donovan, off topic, but I had a thought from the Make a God stream about the wolf wind trapped in Cathay. What if the steppes used to be much less dry, but the wind that brought the monsoon also tied to Gyran was trapped by the Bastion? In other words, the Stormwind is trapped in Cathay, which dragon is commander of the Bastion, also known as Master of the Stormwind, or the Mistress of the Stormwind. Yeah, good old Miao Yang. Yeah, that could be a very interesting story.
Yeah, that's a super fine one. I want to bring up one here just to make sure that I've answered it, because I think it's a good question. No, that's not the one I was going for. Oh, that's the one you did.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Didn't Andy say that Malchus assumed that elves matured around 30, so isn't Alarielle almost an adult? So matured around 30 is a description that I laid in because we have to justify some of the choices that are made by the writers. In the roleplay game, they quite clearly make it 50, which is the equivalent of full maturity, so around about 16, 17 for a human. But the novels keep on attacking this in a variety of ways, and we have to justify it later. So we often say they reach sexual maturity at, say, 30, which is the equivalent of maybe 12 for a human. Most humans reach sexual maturity at about that age, which means that they're at the point where in some societies they're considered to be adults. And I think that is worth noting, that about the age of 30, they are adults by what we would in normal, let's say, Western society, not view to be the case, where we generally say in our society that 16 is a cutoff, and then there's another 18, and maybe one at 21, depending on which version of Western society you go with, and then all the way up to 25 in some others as well. But in the vast majority of, say, European places, it's around about 16 where you get to be considered to be an adult and able to make your own choices. 18 for a lot of stuff. That is not the equivalent of 30. If we were talking about sexual maturity, there's parts of the world where you can marry as a child, as we'd consider it here in the West, because when you reach sexual maturity, your ability to have children, you are considered to be an adult, which would be 12. For some get this earlier. Some people reach sexual maturity at 10. Or even 9, because some people are very early developers. Others are late. They come at about 14, 15. So there's not a nice fixed way of dealing with this. But I think the best way to look at this one, Blitzkrieg, is to say that the writers have messed it up in several places, and the rules have given various examples. So I would probably sum it up as saying anything from around about 25 to 50 is probably anywhere from around about 12 to 20 for humans. Probably. And that's a good starting point, but it's probably a bit less certain than that, and it will be down to the individual elves.
Yep, there you go.
So hopefully that helped. I know that was a bit much in that one, but I do think that one's worth bringing up because the Malekith situation is, I think, pretty important because it directly applies here to Alarielle.
Alana Lex, you've made me realize that I need a Nagash versus Alarielle cage match in my life. That is amazing. That is one of the situations that the end time should have allowed us to enjoy, but we didn't get. Would have been a genuine discussion between a lot of these god tier characters where you have an embodiment of life talking to and dealing with an embodiment of death. And it kind of gets hand waved because the end times was very rushed. And it's a shame.
We're pretty aware nowadays that the end times were supposed to be far more books. And what we have is a curtailed version where what should have been a ton of books basically diving into a whole ton of cool shit, turned into a very small number of books with writers pressured to get it out as swiftly as possible and also hitting certain targets. So we know that the end times weren't great, and we wish they were different.
Yeah, if you ever want to get super sad, there are some interviews. I think Josh Reynolds did it. There are some interviews you can look up online of what it was supposed to be. And the end times was essentially supposed to be more like the Horus Heresy as far as length. And we got what we got. So
yeah.
Korinshima, do you think there's a connection between the Dragon Emperor and Alarielle's chaos purifying power? That's a great question. I would say yes.
I'd say that there almost certainly is, Corinne. Corin, pardon me. And I can't say what that is because it's not being delved into with any detail. But they are too similar for them not to be at least related. Now, you could just go, oh, it's because of the type of magic they're using and just leave it at that. And sure, you could. But I definitely think that there's probably something deeper that would be nice to explore it.
The thing that I would explore with this, if I were you and you're just writing up stuff for your own fun, the thing that I would explore that would be really fun is how the Celestial Dragon Emperor, due to his age mainly and his obsessions, has been demonstrated that he can do it surgically, where he is able to remove Chaos Taint but pull a creature out of it, like we see with the Celestial Lions. Alarielle doesn't. When Alarielle purifies something, all that's left is ash. Like, her power is so overwhelming, it just burns it all away. And I think there's a story there you could explore that would be really fun.
Agreed.
Sorcerer friend, good evening. Just jumped on. Happy to see the super chats not as cursed as I thought they'd be. I don't know what you mean by that. Moving on. Not sure if we talked about this yet, but what is the link between Alarielle and Morslib? Okay, so that's actually an interesting discussion. There are several rituals and rites that are talked about with Alarielle that she has to perform when Morslib and Manslib are in certain positions. Cool. Often Morslib is being blocked by Manslib, which means that its influence is lesser on the world. And I think if you, when we talked about earlier that Alarielle's power rises as Chaos's taint is lesser and it weakens as Chaos's taint goes up. If Morslib is further away from the world, or better yet, being full on blocked by another celestial body such as Manslib, Alarielle's power is going to be significantly higher. But there are certain rituals that she does. Actually, I think the one that you're specifically referring to, if I remember correctly, is there's a ritual where Alarielle has to travel to an island and perform a ritual from the elves believe it keeps Morslib at bay. Okay. They believe it keeps its orbit further away from the planet. And you could argue, like Andy said, that just shows that she is literally the world. She is the world repelling Morslib, keeping it from getting too close to the planet. Because Morslib, we've talked about this, if you go watch our Morslib stream, Morslib essentially has a personality. It has almost a sentience to it. If it could get close enough to the world to lick it or spit on it, it will. So there's something keeping it at bay. And you could argue that Alarielle's what that is, which once again shows how fucking powerful and fucking important the Everqueen is. Where if the Everqueen's dead, what's to stop Majora's Mask from happening?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the best summation for this is that Alarielle is the world. And a lot of what she does as Everqueen is a ritualized representation of the world's sickness and the world's health. And when the world is well, Alarielle is well. And when the world is sick, Alarielle is sick. When Alarielle gets pressured by Morslib, she does certain rituals to hopefully push it out, to stop her from being sick, because Morslib sickens the world as it draws close. And you could say that she is responsible for driving it back. I'm certain elves certainly believe that. I'm sure that there's a host of lizardmen that would have quite a few arguments against that. Some slan saying, fuck you,
like,
do you realize how much work I'm doing right now to keep that fucking moon away? But she absolutely is a representation of the world in a way that no lizard man is at all. She is intrinsically linked to the planet, and that in many respects is the link to Morslib, because Morslib is also in its various erratic orbits linked to what happens on the world. And when we get the great waxing of the great gates in north and south, that's when she gets at her most ill, when things go most wrong, and she becomes, if anything, the most elf and the least goddess, when she has lost almost everything that is Isha within her. So I'd say that if we're to sum up all of her, what is the connection? It would be the connection that Isha has to the world, and thus the connection Morslib does.
Donoman, random Luceman / Cathay lore. There's a type of plant IRL called Amaranthus. Aztecs use this plant as a staple. Use this plant as a staple crop and harvest a grain from it. Is banned by the Spanish, but still used in some parts of Mexico to make candy called alegria.
Didn't know
However,
that bit.
However, different species are also grown in China, where they stir fry the leaves. Could be an interesting interaction between lizard and Cathay if they ever visit each other's land. Cool. That's cool. Cool. Fun fact. Serpanza, frick, marry, kill, Ariel. Okay, very simple. You got to kill Astariel because I don't want to fuck with the timeline. So Astariel has to die. I'm gonna frick Ariel because she already has a dedicated husband. So I'm gonna get in, get out. And Alarielle, I'll marry and get killed and probably die horribly to Tyrion at some point.
Okay, so I'm gonna kill Ariel because she's tainted and broken. Because I'm happy with messing with the timeline because I'm a rebel, man. Between Marion, frick, Alarielle and Astariel, I'd go with marry Astariel and have a fling with Alarielle before Tyrion pops around.
Both ways we're going to die to Tyrion, but we'll enjoy it while it lasts. Joel Martin, off topic. Are all of the gods of the Warhammer world visitors in that they didn't exist on the planet before the interference of the old ones?
So we can answer this one almost conclusively. In that the elves, before they were elevated by the old ones, do not appear to have had gods as we understand them. We do know that the gods consider themselves to be creators of the world as it's understood today in a variety of ways. You could argue, for example, that the arrival of the old ones allowed for the birth of the gods by elevating the elves, elevating, in many respects, the conscious minds around the world, and through doing so created an eternal god that was always there, that was in turn responsible for allowing the old ones to even exist in the first place. There's all manner of arguments that we can take here because the aether is timeless and the old ones are also part aether. So there's a variety of different routes to ultimately, they definitely came into the world and they definitely believe they created it. So that means the elven gods come from elsewhere. But there is one last twist to that. The end times. The end times that basically says, they're just wandering aliens that go from place to place. They arrived. They did shit. There we go.
Yeah, ignore the end times. It's bullshit. It doesn't make sense.
End times.
What I will say is that, so in the newest Lustrio book, which has some really good parts by Cubicle 7, one of the things that I actually really enjoyed is they talk very briefly about the world before the old ones. And we know, like, the Famir worshipped gods before the old ones. But one of the things the book doesn't answer, and I think it's fine that they didn't, is we don't know what these gods were like. Like, if they were just entities that were worshipped but weren't real, kind of like, how our world's relationship with a god is, where you can't really prove there's a god, you just worship it, hope for the best. If that's what it was, or if there were spirits and things like that before the arrival of the old ones, especially because if you go watch our Make a God stream, the term god is very misleading in Warhammer. So I would say we don't know, but I would lean towards there probably were, but if there were, we just don't know who they are and we don't know much about them.
Yeah, if I was to make a call on this one, which is what we often do in these streams, rather than necessarily just looking at the lore, which is, let's be honest, contradictory in this. Are all the gods of the Warhammer world visitors? No. Not all of them. Okay, and you used the word all here. They are not all visitors. However, many of them almost certainly are. Many of them were born in the Aether. Many of them came from the Aether. Many of them are the Aether. So the answer is some are and some are not.
Yep. Dumb man, Kendrick Lamar needs to make a diss track about Tyrion. No, not my boy. He'll never recover. Psylocke. Funny enough, you joke, but in a sense that translating it appropriately, rap battles would absolutely be an elven thing, and elves would be brutally destroyed for eternity if they lost one. Elves would be so butthurt if they lost one of those. Psylocke. So basically, Warhammer story is the elf story. That is an argument that can be made, but it's an argument that someone could easily argue against.
So I'm going to say that yes, it was. And then all the writers, as they slowly but surely expanded other parts of the Warhammer world, went, oops, we've made it the story of the elves. Maybe we should break that up a bit. So they added extra detail. They changed the Lizardman. They made the Lizardman have a greater impact. And then as it moved on to the later editions of the Lizardman, they upped that even further. They then went, oh, wait a minute. We should probably do this for everyone, really, shouldn't we? We don't want the elves to be the most important thing. And we also don't want the Lizardman to be. So let's say the dwarves have got some sort of impact at the beginning of time too. And they slowly but surely expand it. But your answer here is 100% yes. And still to this day, if you want to say who is the most important species for the Warhammer world in terms of the story of its destruction and its eventual destruction, the cataclysm through to the end, it is ultimately the story of the elves. The lizardmen are absentees. They leave. The elves fight to the end. They are the core component for the great ritual that stops magic destroying the world. They are still at heart the story of Warhammer, and that really sucks if you're not an elf fan, because the story is at its heart ultimately tied to the elven species.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Andy. If you go back, you don't have to go back far. If you go back to like 5th edition, it's literally the elf story with friends. You hit, I think, 6th, and the lizardmen go, "Oh wait,
Starts
we're here
to
too."
mess up a bit.
And then you have to wait till the fucking like 8th edition,
old world, really.
or the old world for the dwarves to be like, "Oh yeah, we're here too." Yeah.
If I'm being blunt, it's the old world that properly puts a big mixture in there and says, "No, we're going to chop it up a bit," and definitely say it's not just the elves.
Yeah, it's like, "Oh yeah, the Catayan dragons are here too." Like it's yeah. Which, hey, that is a good strength of the old world. Morning to Crescent, any aspect of Alarielle not problematic as hell? Yeah, a lot of them. Like she is. It depends on what you mean by problematic. I think there are many parts of her story that are awesome, like the fact that she is an Everqueen that literally takes her role by the balls and actually goes in there to. The way I would put this is Alarielle as a person seems to have significantly more of an impact than Alarielle the Everqueen, where Everqueen is like the dominant aspect of her character. Alarielle is the dominant aspect of her character, which is a problem if you're looking at it from a very zoomed out perspective, but it makes her a really fun, awesome character. And let's be real, your favorite characters are going to be problematic characters because they're shaking the world up.
Yeah. So Alarielle is a super cool character. And she's super cool for a whole ton of reasons that the writers don't realize, because she has problematic aspects that they've never explored, because they just didn't realize what had been created, or they didn't look at the numbers, or they didn't do. So you'll find that a lot of her character stories are incredibly cool. They're just her beating living shit out of something, or her being involved with Tyrion and their great romance and how wonderful that is, and the ramifications of that as time has gone by, and how they have reined in their emotions or let them go, or whatever else it might be. Super cool stories that aren't at heart problematic. It's when you start peeling back the curtain and you look at what lies behind these stories that you start going, it's all founded on a problematic situation. It's a little bit like having yourself a close friend who you really like, and you've known them for 10 years. And they've been married with a partner for a long time. And then you find out 10 years later that they first met when he was a teacher and she was 15. And you're like, wait, what? Wait, and she goes, yeah, I was his student. And you're like, wait, but that's problematic, isn't it? And they're like, no, we've got 2 kids. We didn't do anything illegal.
They're in like
until
their
we're legal.
50s at this point. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They're much older now, and you look at them and you're like, okay, wait a minute. There's definitely something wrong here. I think I should be outraged for some reason. But the outrage is so distant to their current life that you kind of go, I don't know how I should respond to this. And at heart, Tyrion and Alarielle are that couple. The one that in the modern times, no one's going to say anything about it because it's so distant history. It's something that has passed. But if you peel back that curtain and look at the past, you're suddenly going, uh-oh.
Yeah, which makes a good story.
It does. It's a great story.
It makes a good story. Sorcerer friend, hi Tyrion. My name's Chris Hansen. Why don't you have to see right over here? And so Chris Hansen was brutally murdered, found burnt to a crisp mysteriously. Solar Rising. Oddly, it's not in the wiki. It's in the Bone Cage. Okay, so the Bone Cage was it's a short story. Which
I have no recollection of that story at all.
Yeah, the End Times had a very short number of small number of short stories that were released alongside it. A lot of people don't know about them because they weren't advertised very well. But the Bone Cage is a prequel to the Nagash book.
No, I read that. I don't remember this detail, but I read that. I'm just looking it up just to double check.
Yeah, I've read it as well because
I still think I might have a copy of it.
I remember hating that story because fucking that's where the Fey Enchantress is revealed to be a vampire, which doesn't make sense. But that's the only thing I remember about it, which is probably why. But if she's blind in that story, unfortunately they don't carry it over to the big book, because I think in the regular Nagash book there's no mention of her being blind, which is typical in time shenanigans where the books disagree with each other on details. But I will say her being blind would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense for her character because of what she represents and what she's capable of, because prophecy is a big aspect of her character. But yes, Aliathra, Daith, Eltharion. Well, Eltharion...
Well, Daith makes sense, as does Eltharion. As he shifts from blindness to not.
For a while, but then he got better.
Yeah, he was blinded. Daith is Vol's personal representation, so no great surprise, because Vol is also blind, the blind smith, so no great surprise there either. But Aliathra being blind, I think, is a great detail, and I think it's going to be a part of my version of her in Lorehammer. I have just shifted that character in my head entirely, because I like it.
Stellar Rising, good job. You can have your
I really like that Stellar Rising. I'm really glad you brought it up. I had no recollection of this. I do recall reading the Bone Cage, and I do recall reading it something like this. Oh, fucking really? Is that what you're doing? Oh, fucking hell!
Yeah, here. Let me give you 2 quick reasons you don't remember this part. That's because the Fey Enchantress is revealed to be a vampire, which probably jumped out at you. B, it's a collection of humans who are all descendants of each of the human gods. So there's the Randall descendant, the Shalia descendant, the Monan descendant, the Shalia descendant. So it's like all of the different god children hanging out in a cage together, which you go, what?
I had forgotten about that.
That's why
I feel slightly sick that it's being brought up. I'm going to have to go read it again. I'm going to mark it in my notes so that I go read it again and start crying at it.
Yeah. Also, an Eltharion episode would be great, because Eltharion is one of the best characters. A, he's a great character. B, he is one of the best examples of how a different timeline was so different. Alt timeline Eltharion was awesome. He was so cool. Not that I have a problem with 8th edition Eltharion. I love 8th edition Eltharion, but 6th edition Eltharion was the GOAT. He was cool.
The 6th ed.
Yeah, because for those that don't know, 6th edition actually went like a good 10-20 years further in the future than later editions did. More aggressive. Also, would Tyrion's influence is just an early age explain why Alarielle is so aggressive, just like he is? Yes, that's what.
So, Mornington, I think that is a good way to justify the nature of Alarielle's character standing so contrary to what you'd expect from an Everqueen and someone possessed with the direct will and influence of all of the previous Everqueens and a goddess. And I think that her overriding character is strongly influenced by Tyrion, and her passion, her exceedingly deep passion for him and their way of life in many respects, because she's an elf and their emotions are strong, allows her to override everything that is pulsing through her in terms of her powers.
Sarmelian Bloodweaver, combo between Alarielle and the Slans, such as Money or Croak. So this would be, the Slan are always a fascinating thing because they know things no one else knows. And the important thing about their character is to make the Slan work and to make the universe rose, the Slan can never explain things. They should never explain anything. They should have a very weird view of the world, because they would know things about Alarielle that no one else would because of what she kind of is, but they would have a very bizarre view on it. And if you ever did something like this, which I would never recommend doing, the Slan should only speak in visions, which good authors have done that, where when a Slan talks to someone that's not a Slan, the Slan thinks images at them to try and, because the Slan is trying to put it in a frame of reference they can understand, and it never works. Where the person being talked about the Slan is like, as their mind's like trying to deal with the Slan reaching into their brain and putting images and words and thoughts in there. And what would the conversation look like? Probably really fucking weird, and there might be little grains of information that Alarielle would walk away with, and that would be it.
Yeah, this is a brick talking to a stone.
Yeah.
It's so beyond what we expect from the circumstances, and I don't think there would be understanding on either part. They are made of componently similar stuff, as in their material, talking about immaterial shit and with immaterial laced through them. But it's a brick and a stone. They are just not going to be doing this.
Yeah, the best way I could put it is there's a very fun, brief white dwarf side panel story about one of the Slans seeing Slanesh during an end times thing. And the way the Slan talk about gods is very funny, because if you don't know what they're talking about, you would have no fucking idea what they're talking about. Like, if you're not like, oh, he's talking about Slanesh, the way the Slan talk about gods, you would literally never guess it. Because they have such a weird way of comprehending what a god is.
Alarielle wouldn't either. Yeah, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, Donovan, it's interesting how elves are simultaneously very emotionally driven, but also come across as very standoffish, aloof, and such. Is that elves trying to suppress / control their emotions Vulcan style, or is it that when they try to act professional / stern, they also do so in a very extreme version?
No, it's because we have different versions of what elves are and by different writers. But what we can say for certain is that the elf character is deeply emotional, and whatever it is that they're doing, they're entirely focused on. And some people who are deeply emotional look like cold fish. Because absolutely everything that they're emotional about isn't necessarily. Oh, yep, you want to say something?
I have a relatable example for you. If you've ever been around a very emotional teenager who's dealing with something very emotional to them, like someone's broken up or whatever, try and go into a room and talk to them about anything else.
Yeah,
and they will be so standoffish and like, they're not
got their own points of focus. I think that's perfect, actually. They've got their own things that they're focused on, and they are so focused on it that others who try to engage them see them as being utterly aloof and not caring about what they think is important, and they're attempting to converse with them about. I sort of codified that for my game by using the paths, which allows it to manifest in a variety of fun ways, but it also ensures that the elven emotions sort of make sense to play them, which is a core component of the roleplay game. You got to be able to play these things. You got to understand how to play them, which is why I made the path rules for my game, so anyone who's playing an elf can go, I should do this, 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 and this. And sometimes that means they come across exceedingly aloof. In fact, often, because they're so focused on a different thing, or so focused on approaching that thing in a way that you don't. So I'd say emotional pinpoint focus would be a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I want to add to credit Andy that the pass works so fucking well for this. I have a player who she's very sweet, and she's in a campaign I'm playing with her as a fellow player. She is like the empathetic heart of the party, but in the campaign I'm GMing, she is playing an elf on the path of the crone, Moray Heg. Mm-hmm. And because of the rules of the path, she has to be an asshole. She has to. And it's so funny watching her actually do a great job of playing a dick, because the rules of her path dictate, I don't want to say what they are because I know there are some players in here and I don't want to reveal aspects of her character, but there are things she has to do that result in her, from the other player's perspective, being like, what a bitch. And it's so well done. So use the other path.
And I felt that was whilst the path rules are not an essential component for making Warhammer Elves, I found that the path rules were an essential component for playing Warhammer Elves. And it's all too easy, if you don't have a framework to work around, to just play humans who are possibly a bit excitable, or you try to think, what would it be like to be a teenager again, and try to dial it up a little bit like that. And this just provides framework. And I think that, to answer your question directly, it is that framework, whatever it is in the Warhammer world, that can make them super aloof, where they look like that they do not have any concern for what you're talking about, but their emotional engagement's just on a different level.
Yeah, Boy, this made me realize all Age of Sigmar elves are guided by either the descendants of Anarian or Morathian. I kind of love it. Unintended AOSW. Yes, AOS, I'm going to say this and then move on quickly because we don't have time. That's not what the stream about. AOS elves are awesome. They're awesome. I think Andy would actually love them a lot, but there's a lot to get through. And the first edition version sucks massive dick. But the second edition
Sadly,
version...
the only one I read.
Yeah, the second edition onwards versions are genuinely fantastic. And they have they represent very unique things. But one day, for fun, maybe a Wednesday night stream, we can have a discussion about that. Yeah. But I would have to make sure that I would make a PowerPoint for that. I would genuinely have to do a PowerPoint stream for that. Wonder Alpha, the Everqueen arc looks a lot like the evolution of the goddess Iana to Aphrodite to Venus Victrix.
Yeah, Inanna to Aphrodite to Venus Victrix. I don't disagree, and I think that there is definitely some unintended reflections there. I don't think this in any respect is what any writer wanted to do, but I think that when you look at the overall work of all the writers involved, they've accidentally come out with something that's not entirely dissimilar.
Diamond, does Finnebar also know that Tyrion is kind of broken like Teclis does? I think that could be interesting if Teclis had confided with him. Finnebar is a heartbreaking character, and you can hear us ramble about this if you go back to our Phoenix tier list stream, because he's so important and he's so awesome, but he's so very
badly served.
He's very badly explored. Literally, the only time he was even really able to be viewed in any notable way was during like the Warhammer Age of Reckoning comics, where he appears in the comic books and he's kick-ass. But that's also an alternate timeline.
Yeah, cool piece of art as well.
Yeah, like him with his big flaming sword. Yeah, he looks like a badass.
Oh, he's awesome. My answer to this one would be that the problem with Tyrion is that he's perfect. And he appears perfect. And everybody that's involved with him can see nothing more than one of the most successful elves that have ever lived in the last half century. Every campaign he goes on, he largely succeeds at. Everything he's involved with, he succeeds with. The Ever Queen herself has fallen in love with him. He is the leader of the Shining Hosts. The elves all look up to him as this perfect general, this perfect warrior. And the Phoenix King looks at him and sees nothing but competence. Massive competence. He is extraordinary. Now, all of them know he is from the house of Anarion. All of them know it. And all of them say behind the scenes, he's from the cursed house. We have to be careful. We have to be careful. We have to be careful. But all of the time, he again proves them wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong, because he is actually extraordinary and at heart broken. And that is what makes him such a brilliant character. He is a flaw that no one can see the flaw in. And his brother looks on broken physically, and arguably the truer of heart between the two of them. The one who isn't a slave to his passions. The one who can look out and say, no, this is a better route towards a solution. Not the perfect isolationist elf way. He is, in many respects, a supremacist. He believes in elf supremacy. He believes they're better than everything. And elves like that sort of shit. Teclis doesn't. He has a different view. And he sees his brother as someone who is probably pretty problematic, but he loves him so deeply because it's his twin.
Yeah, one of the things I would say to reinforce in this stream is that all of the things we're talking about, the bad sides of Tyrion, are very fucking hard to see unless you are looking from a god view.
Yeah.
If you're not looking from a god view, these things are virtually invisible.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Tyrion is that everybody knows that he has to be flawed, but they can't see it. Everybody knows he has to be, because surely the curse, and it's a little bit like the Everqueens.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes that shows the problem, if you read Tyrion Teclis's pages in like the 8th edition army book, is it mentions that Tyrion and Teclis have the curse of Cain. Teclis's aspect of the curse is very well known. Tyrion's, some of the elves believe, has yet to manifest, which is not true. It has manifested, but the elves can't see it. Yeah. They literally don't understand it.
And in some respects, that's the curse made manifest, because he is an Aryan. And it's really difficult to get past that. It's very clear with the later stuff that he is basically an Aryan reborn. At least, not physically, he's not actually an Aryan, but he very much looks like him, acts like him, works like him. He is perfection, and that's great.
Yep, Cornshima, Tyrion Teclis stream win at some point. If y'all vote for it, it wins.
And I'll admit, I would prefer to do them separately, because there's so much to talk about each, and their characters are so both similar and diametrically different.
That would, that might be one of the rare occasions where we do, like, if we end up doing them, we do them back to back.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. Maybe we should do that as a vote at one point. 3 back-to-back ones.
Where does it say that Cain and Cain are different? Cain and Cain. The big thing to look at the different versions of Cain is like consider like the human version versus the high elf version versus the dark elf version versus the wood elf version versus what happens to him when he gets the sword, which requires you, unfortunately, to read through various editions of the army books, look at the roleplay books, the Tome of Salvation, and also require you to delve into some of the End Times book where it talks about the war in heaven, and also deal with, like, it requires you to do a lot, which sucks, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'd keep this relatively simple. Each description of the gods in their different iterations are different. So where does it say it? In their descriptions of the gods. But
Ooh, okay.
in world, the elves believe that there is only Cain, their version, and all the other versions are just their god manifested and misunderstood. So it's the books themselves.
All right, we're gonna start hitting the gas a little bit here. Baron von Master, with Alarielle's ability to purify corruptions, there are limits, such as could she purify one as foul as Lord Skrulk if she could even get close? So this is a great question because there's two potential answers. One is that in her tabletop rules, what's very interesting is that Alarielle only gets her so it says forces of destruction, which is actually a very broad umbrella. So that if you go by that law, it would essentially mean that, yeah, she could walk up and Lord Skrulk. But the tricky part is defining what exactly her power is purifying. Is it just purifying the taint of magic? In which case, it would be very broad, and she could one-shot just about anything if her power is up enough. Because she would be eliminating the corruptive essence of magic, which isn't chaos. There's a difference. It's a weird difference, but there is a difference there. And it would probably depend on the writer that you ask. Some writers would say absolutely, some would say no.
I'm going to keep this as simple as I can because of the time. The answer is yes, but the answer is also, when it comes to writing it, the answer is no. And that if you go purely by the rules and purely by the descriptions and everything else, she will touch Skrulk and he's gone. But if this was written, that isn't what would happen, because we would want drama. We would want something exciting. We would want a story. We'd want the Horned Rat's direct hand over his favoured servant. We'd want Nurglitch involved. We'd want something. And that is what would be written. The high drama would turn it into something else. But if we don't consider that, poor old Skrulk's goner.
Yeah. Also, fun fact, if you ever look at Alarielle's 8th edition rules, Alarielle's fucking spooky. Her magic was nuts.
Yeah.
She could cast like the Lore of Life and the Lore of Light with like a +5 in addition to her wizard level. So it was more like a +8. She was bonkers.
She's pretty bonkers.
Colbone, the audiobook version of Giant Slayer by Bill King, Jonathan Keeble gave Tyrion a really deep, gruff voice that you wouldn't expect from an elf. He sounds terrifying. I think it actually fit him quite perfectly.
So I'm totally cool with this. The dude's over 7 foot tall. And when you're big, your voice goes deep. That's as simple as it is. That's what happens. People who are short have people who at least have shorter larynx, but people who are short generally have higher voices. People who are tall have deeper voices. And then you add hormones and all the rest, and things go weird. But I have no issue at all with him having a super deep voice. He's a giant. He stands over other elves like they're children. He is a walking god in terms of what he looks like to the other elves. Think of what that looks like to a human. I would walk up to him at my 6 foot tall and go, oh, I'm a bit more, I'm like 6'2", whatever. I'd look up like that and go, well, holy shit. Holy shit. You're huge. So I have no issue with that at all. Although I always have an issue with people who make elves sound human.
If you ever, by the way, completely not related, if you ever want to have a really good laugh, go listen to the Malekith voice from the Mark of Chaos sequel, Battle March. The Malekith voice is so funny. Like, it's like gargling gravel to the... Like, you think the Total War version is low? No. When he's yelling at the sorceress character from Battle March, his voice is hilarious. Magladroth, also, go play Chaos Bane, listen to how low Teclis's voice is. That's another very funny one. Teclis has like a Benedict Cumberbatch level low voice in the Chaos Bane.
Unexpected for Teclis. Interesting.
I know, it weirds me out every time. Magladroth 44, doesn't Morathi have a thing for Tyrion? Because she reminds him of an Aryan.
Yeah, and, yes. When we say he looks like an Aryan reborn, he does. And Morathi is in love with an Aryan. And pretty much always will be.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
for her...
one of her core concepts. Was she good for an Aryan? That's a different line entirely. But she's
come back this Wednesday.
Yeah, come back this Wednesday, because we're going to be talking that shit out.
Yeah, there is a very strong argument that Age of Sigmar does a beautiful job with of Marathi's literal only weakness is an Aryan.
Yep, and I think it's accurate.
Xenophar, how will Alarielle react to the to end times?
End
is that
times?
what you mean by ET? Because the answer is badly.
Badly. In many respects, I think you can argue that Alarielle is responsible for the end times, and Teclis is half responsible. Tyrion, pardon me, is half responsible for what she became. So, in many respects, Tyrion in the Curse of an Aryan is what brings the world to an end, in the same way that it saved it.
Blitzkrieg 1012, thanks for answering my question. You're welcome.
No problems.
Magladra 44, solution to the Sword of Cain problem, just give it to Nagash. Give it to Nagash. It stops bothering the elves and goes to someone who will make good use of it. That totally wouldn't have any horrifying, awful ramifications whatsoever.
I do wonder how things like that would occur. What happens if a non-elf wields it? What happens if it's other people? I think there's a huge question there to be answered. I'm not sure it would work the way everyone expects, though, because this was created by Vol for a specific purpose, god killing, by the elves. I'm not sure it would do what you expect.
Yeah, that would be a fun thing to explore. There's a lot of different ways you could go with it.
Yeah.
Baron von Bastard, now I'm wondering what would be the result of warp fuckery causing the Everchild to appear at a Lizardman city, and how them raising this pillar being of the world in their own way. That's a lot of weird packed into one hypothetical.
Heavy what if there.
So we're just gonna leave that as that would be weird.
Yeah, that would be a what if.
Yeah, that's up there with like, what if Karl Franz walked into his throne room and Mazda Mundi had accidentally teleported to his chair? Ricky Chapman, what does Alarielle think of non-elven nature gods?
Yeah, this one's super easy. As far as the elves are concerned, they're all just their gods. Now, is that real? That's a matter of debate, but their perspective is they are all just their gods.
Stellar Rising, it is in the big book, The Return of the Get. Is it really? Wait,
wow, where is that Stellar Rising? I don't recall that. But if you do give us a page reference, if you could drop that over in Discord, that'd be amazing, because I do not recall that at all. And I feel like I've just missed this piece of lore. It's really annoying me.
So by big book,
Stellar Rising for mentioning it.
You mean the Black Library book? Okay, when I say big book, I mean the two book.
As do volume. I, but nevertheless, I've also read this and don't recall it, and it's bugging me.
Yeah, please do give us page numbers. We would love to, because I just don't remember it. But I also haven't read that book.
But hey, go figure. We've both blind to it, which is appropriate.
It's only been 10, 11 years.
Yeah, it's been a while since I read it too.
Dono Man, I think I've heard the thing about the Fey Enchantress being a vampire before, but somehow it blocked from my memory. I'm not a lore master by any means, but even with a curse, I understand my birth. Yeah, it sucks. It's stupid. I hate it. And I'll put it this way: of all the things that got thrown into the end times, that was like in my top 3. I was mad.
And most of the elf shit just made me go, what the fuck?
Theo Barona, could you expand to the Everqueen lineage?
Super easy. The Everqueen is the daughter of the previous Everqueen, who's the daughter of the previous Everqueen, or all the way back to the first. The man component of this is supposedly the current Phoenix King each time. That doesn't make any sense with even the most cursory of viewings, but it is the case as far as the lore is concerned.
Krimgelto, somebody mentioned a godchild. Did you know I got kids? That's horrifying to think about, but thank you. Let's look. God damn it. Let's look, Chris. If Tyrion died and it stuck, how big would the fallout have been of Alarielle's wrath? And it would be ugly. Especially because when her emotions literally cause manifestations in different parts of the world, the fallout would be bad.
See, this is a storyline that I would like to have seen the end times take, or possibly the other way around, or possibly something. I would have had Tyrion fall, which meant that Tyrion's heart blows and he comes back to life. Their love ends, which means she now becomes a very different figure. All of the love that she holds is changed. Now, in my rules, that means the effect is they change paths. They move into a different aspect of their life. Works perfectly.
Oh, but, yeah.
Andy's right. This would be fascinating if it had played out in a big, impactful way.
I completely forgot about the heart. Yeah, so the Heart of Avalorn, which, fun fact, does nothing in the end times for some stupid-ass reason. The Heart of Avalorn, quite literally, the only way it works is that Tyrion has to die. Dead. Completely. The end. He's gone. and it activates, but it's destroyed. And it's literally the embodiment of their love for
Just
one
had to
another.
bring this one up from Vault Boy.
Not the Everstream, please God. That's super funny.
Thanks, Vault Boy.
Eric, Tyrion is the nature of the golden glow. Yeah, you're not wrong. The concept of a golden glow. Yeah. Sign of the Emperor, kind of sound anticlimactic that Ashurin just broke almost immediately after being so hyped up. Oh, no, Malekith's sword. Yeah, anticlimactic that Ashurath just broke almost immediately after being so hyped up when Malekith has his big climactic fight with Tyrion wielding Ice Fang. So I can't tell. There's some typos in here, Simon, that are throwing me off just a little bit. But I'm assuming you're talking about the final fight between Phoenix King Malekith and Tyrion, Avatar of Cain, where Malekith gets bodied kind of again after there was a lot of buildup to like the reforging of Destroyer into a new sword. But yeah, it's kind of just dead.
Agreed.
Donovan, do you think the first ever queen was the first ever elf raised up by the old ones? That would be a reasonable argument.
So Dynaman, I think the answer to that is yes. I think almost definitely yes. And it absolutely makes sense of the story as it stands. And it also not only makes sense of the story, if it's something else, the story starts to fall apart and make less sense, which means you're telling a slightly different story. So probably yes.
Yeah. And we are for the Everstream. Thank you, Korishima. The last thing, this will take us just a little bit over time, but I'm fine with that. The last thing that I think we should,
it's a Monday.
Yeah, the last thing we should talk about that I think is important to talk about is why are the Dark Elves so hell-bent on killing the Everqueen?
Oh, yeah.
That is an important thing that is never addressed, other than there's a vague hand wave of, it'll break the spirit of the High Elves. But as you may have noticed, as we're talking over the course of this stream, killing the Everqueen would have horrific, nightmarish, world-breaking implications.
Yep.
But it is literally, whenever Malekith invades, it is like one of his top 3 things that needs to get done, is the Everqueen has to die. But why?
Are you asking? I thought you were going to come up with a whole thing.
So I'll put this of, A, it's weird. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's never explained. And I'm actually really curious to hear what Andy's got to think on it, because I never really thought about it, to be honest.
I 100% think this is something that they would be chasing. And the answer is why? There are multiple reasons why. Number one, they are entirely following the underworld gods. And the underworld gods disagree heavily with the entire rule of Azurin and Isha et al. They wish to undermine everything that those gods represent. And the world darkening, the world beginning to collapse as the Everqueen dies, is symbols of their success. Look at Nagaroth and how dark and twisted that place has become with its long-term hold underneath the Witch King and all of the Witch King's many minions. Now, regardless of what name you use for the Witch King, even if it's not the Witch King, they are clearly going for one thing, which is bringing everything to their aspect. And Isha is not a part of that. Now, you might go, but surely the death of Isha means that all of them will suddenly feel sad, and it's weird because life has gone from the world, and yup, and they freaking love it. This is success made manifest. They see the withering, and they're like, we are winning. Our way of reflecting the world is coming to pass. Ulthuan is now collapsing. We can take over it and bring it to our way of thinking. Ulthuan would never be the same again if the Dark Elves came to rule as Dark Elves, because it would be taken over in the same way that Nagaroth has been. It would be entirely darkly aspect. Dark magic would be everywhere. The concept of Avalorn would be torn to shreds. The Everqueen would be gone. Isha would be gone. Why do they want to do it? Because it's what they want to do. It's as blunt as that. It's not deep beyond the fact that this is their goal. They intend for the Dark Elf way to be the winning way, in the same way that the Azure are very keen to have the High Elf way be the winning way. And the Wood elves are sitting on the edge going, you're fucking mad, the both of you. You've lost it. You're both wrong. And when people go, the high elves are the good guys, look how bad the dark elves are, they forget that the high elves are also entirely aspected to one part of what it is to be an elf. And they are deeply entrenched in one way of thinking, the same way the dark elves are entrenched on the other side. And the wood elves think they're mad. And let's be honest, the wood elves themselves are pretty damn crazy. Those spirit worshipping weirdos, but they are broken, and they both think that their way is the only correct way. And in some respects, the end times did this right. They brought the elves together. That's what the story was supposed to always kind of be. The great sundering, and the fact the only way that the elves could be any real force was to bring them back together as one force. And that would mean not killing Isha. That would mean a whole host of fun, cool things that I think the End Times didn't properly explore. But why do they want to do it? Because it means that the Dark Elves are winning. It's just a part of what they're after. It's not that deep in the great scheme of things, I think. Do you think that's unfair?
No, I think that's actually a very reasonable explanation. And it works well with what's going on with like the Dark Elves invading Ulthuan and everything they're trying to do. It also goes well, I think that also does a really good job of exploring the idea of why Malekith considers the unmaking of the vortex to not be a bad idea, of that it literally allows the gods to come back, which would include the underworld gods.
Yeah, totally. But this is a kind
I'm gonna run to the
proper...
restroom real quick.
Yeah, cool. While we're doing that, I'll just happily chat away as you're in the restroom probably listening to me, which is weird. We are looking at a time when the Dark Elves in Ascendance, because the Everqueen is dead, will see everything is becoming benightened. The sky itself darkens. Life begins to wither. But with that comes great strength of the dark aspects of the gods. So there is a weakening of Isha and a strengthening of other deities. And that is why the Dark Elves are looking for it in particular. And I think that's super fun. Having said that, though, it's not a universally applied sensation. For all it is the entire world that will shake at the death of Alarielle, should it ever occur, the dwarves just don't feel it. They are completely out with that particular cycle. They are not attuned to the world in the same way that anyone that is magically attuned absolutely is. They may be, at one with the stone or some nonsense like that, but in reality, they're kind of not. They are entirely unique species that's not grounded within the fabric of the reality of the world itself in the same way that the elves are. So, yeah, I think it is their success. The darker aspected gods wax in strength when the lighter aspected gods, again to use dark and light here as a simple way of defining the great, what is yin and yang symbol that popped up in a lot of the older elf stuff. The dark aspect and the light aspect, the black and the white of it all. The lighter aspected part of their pantheon weakens, the darker aspect gets the big fat side of it and gets stronger. And that's what the Dark Elves are after.
That would be a fun what if at one point in the distant future would be, what if the Everqueen died?
What's it? I think you could even bring that back. I think it's going to be kind of close to the one we're doing. I think it might be better. What if Alarielle died without a proper successor? Because that means we can differentiate it from the Cataclysm version.
Yeah, because I also think it'd be a lot more of a focus on like global ramifications as opposed to just like elf. Krimgelto, God interns. Oh, instead of children. My fault. Also, fuck you, Searing Doom. Dumb man. Okay, mad theory. Maybe Marathi wants to become a replacement of the Everqueen as a sort of authority version of the Everqueen instead.
So Marathi is absolutely, without any shadow of a doubt, special. Now, why is she special? Perhaps as incarnation of another deity? Definitely a possibility, as in a proper avatar, rather than just simply, she's fucking ancient and enormously the most powerful dark magic user probably in the world. She has been responsible for enormous stuff since the beginning of time. She is special. So I don't think that this is too far in terms of fan theory craziness. This makes sense, particularly when you look at what happens to her in Age of Sigmar. She becomes a goddess anyway. It's on the cards. It's already happening. She's in exactly the same place as, for example, Alarielle. And that all you need to do is dial back a little bit and say, well, she probably was then too, and it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility. And in some respects may even speak to the character she has when, for example, Inarian dies and where she goes after that. There's a whole host of cool shit you could do with that, but it's definitely definitely not hard-coded into her character, at least yet. Who knows what future writers may do, but I don't think this is that mad.
Yeah, because the end times makes her an avatar, but they don't do anything fun with it. They're just kind of like, oh, here's a check mark, and I think they give her, I want to say she's Hakardi, if I remember right, which was like, Donovan, to summarize elves, Assura only light, Druki only darkness, Azra, you're both crazy. We have it correct. Right, tree spirits? Tree spirits, I tolerate your presence. Yeah.
Spot on. Spot on.
Corn Shima, if Alarielle and Aisha survive into Age of Sigmar, wouldn't that mean that Aisha is the only god that survives into AOS?
Turns out no.
Turns out no. That's genuinely a complex topic we don't have time for today, because I see what you're asking, and you're not wrong, but you're also right, but you're also wrong. So unfortunately, I don't have time to get into that right now, especially because 3rd edition is or 4th edition actually is dramatically shaking this up. Where 1st edition said the elven gods are dead.
Lore, we're not abandoning it. We're yanking it in.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Maybe Warhammer was actually a good idea. AOS in a nutshell. Poor guys.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, and that brings us to the end of today's stream.
Yeah, that was fun. So we didn't really cover a lot of the things I half expected to cover. We didn't do the intro that I have expected to do. This was a bit more of a, holy shit, there's so much to talk about Alarielle. And they're going to take us into a bunch of different places. But my summary on this is that Alarielle, have taken at face value, is a fun, high elf character who is a manifestation of a goddess and has some pretty freaky special rules. However, if we look into the depth of Alarielle and everything that she represents, what her age was when certain events occurred, what her age was when she met certain people, and what resulted from their first meetings, you start going, wait a minute, this is a bit odd. And then when you look at the Everqueen itself as a position, and you start looking at the rules for being an Everqueen, you start going, but this is a bit odd, until eventually people like us come along. And we sit down and we say, we're going to do a stream about the Everqueens. By the way, they're broken. And we're going to be talking about Alarielle, who, by the way, is a much more fascinating character than you might first realize. You might just think of her as this very pretty elf that no one's managed to draw well yet, and all models of her look stupid. But she's much more than that, because she is a victim of trauma. A trauma where, in the Warhammer world at least, we have lots of characters who are, but her trauma is a little bit deeper than you might realize. It's not just simply they tried to kill her when she was young, which is the classic piece of Warhammer trauma. It's that the person who saved her, who was centuries older than her, when she was barely an adult, almost certainly not an adult, but a child, becomes her lover. And that is a story. A story that's glossed over by writers who make Tyrion the perfect example of everything, who make Alarielle the beautiful woman to be seduced and to do the things, forgetting that they are dealing with a mighty age gap. And that's fun. We have a character who is from a line of cursed individuals that span back to the first Phoenix King. She is her ultimate granddad up that line, and looks identical to Tyrion, her lover. There's all manner of cool finicky issues that you might go, as a writer of Warhammer at some point, should any of you become one, and go, I think I'm going to have to write this differently because this is broken. No, don't. If you are ever in this place in future, and you're in a place where you can take Alarielle and look at her character, do so, because elves aren't human. And this is what this character represents, I think, more than almost many of the others. And that is that elves do not have the same social mores that we do. They are different. They have different views on age gaps. They have to. They just have to. Because they are a centuries-long living species that die when they run out of interest in the world. That's pretty much the only time they die. They die when they're sort of bored with the world and they fade away. And that might happen after centuries. It might happen after, in some cases, thousands of years. It might be that they desperately don't want to fade away. But they are. So they use magic in some term or another to keep them going because their intellect wishes to keep on living. Hellebron Crone, I'm looking at you. There is a host of cool things this character offers in regards to incest, age gaps, stuff that we find problematic that elves don't necessarily find problematic. Also, we have some interesting things about elven maturity. When it doesn't occur. We've got a host of cool things about the gods. What are they? What aren't they? What is Ariel over with the wood elves? This character is broken in the lore. Almost everything, when you look at it, doesn't add up. But it can be made to add up. But when you do, and you accept every rule that has to be put in place from the previous editions into the modern editions, you end up with something that is a product of incest, that is itself a character involved with incest. There's a massive age gap that's deeply problematic by modern standards. She's a character who is warlike and extreme in a way that no previous ever queen has been, and there's an obvious reason why that's the case, because of Tyrion. And we get to view Tyrion through an almost correct lens, and that's that he is deeply cursed. And it shows in all of his relationship with the Everqueen and the child they inevitably have, which arguably breaks the world. And for me, that's beautiful.
Don't forget about the traumatic uprising of not being allowed to be with her mother and sister who died while they were away. So she didn't get to build a connection with them, and she's deeply resentful of that, and also wasn't allowed to hang out with any other male elves until she was already Everqueen.
Yeah, she's just such a fascinating character, and one that the writers involved, bless them, kind of didn't realize they'd made. I don't think any of them were quite aware of everything that the character implies, and what they have created for someone who then tries to come in afterwards and explain it all is something so fundamentally problematic and broken that I think it makes a perfect character. So if you are someone out there who writes for elves at any point, whether it's very recently or in the future or anything similar, don't mess with her. If anything, dial it up and make it all horrific, because this is Warhammer. Now, we don't need to dwell on the details. There's lots of ways we can write this, much as the Marathi Malarian Witch King issue can be fudged a lot, because Games Workshop doesn't like that sort of crap. It doesn't mean that it's ignored or put away and the writers behind the scenes don't know what's actually going on. It's horrible. And that's Dark Elf. That's Elf. And I think it's something...
I'm so curious what the elf... If the Elf Arcane Journal is going to talk about Alarielle.
I'm terrified and curious. I'm terrified because I've got a horrible feeling they will sanitize everything, because it is the inclination of most writers where you don't need to sanitize, you just need to be careful with your language.
Yep. Last couple of little super chats here. Sion, what would Estinian and Tyrion think of each other, and would Estinian be Asher or Druchii? Estinian would probably be Asher, in my opinion. Like, he's a bit of a vengeful asshole, but he's also very, he's very Eltharion coded. So if I take with that link, because I think he is very similar to Eltharion, I think him and Tyrion would actually get along quite well, because Eltharion is one of the only, Tyrion is one of the only friends Eltharion has. Where Tyrion and Eltharion actually, because he's Tyrion. But those two get along suspiciously well, which is something we'll talk about a later date. What would Alarielle and Ysayle think of each other? They're very different. They're very, very different. I don't think Alarielle would think much of her at all, to be honest, but I think Ysayle would find her very interesting. For anyone confused, those are Final Fantasy 14 characters. Anyway, Miss Paradoxical, thank you very much for the Prime sub, by the way. I saw that earlier. And that...
It's the end of our stream. Thank you all very much. It's been marvelous. If you haven't already pressed the subscribe button and you're sitting there out there in YouTube land and haven't pressed subscribe, press it. If you're sitting there over on the other side of the world and you haven't pressed subscribe, press it, for goodness sake. You'll get all the lovely warnings that we're about to go live. And also do remember that next week and this Wednesday as well, we'll be on the Lawhammer channels. We will not be on the Loremaster of Sotek channels. So you'll need to go over there and press subscribe there too. Subscription-tastic.
Speaking of which, the subject for next Sunday, according to the poll that we did, is Hell Pit.
Ooh, Hell Pit. Awesome. Yep, so we're like that was going to be the subject. Nice.
Destroyed the other two.
Did it? There you go. Hell Pit.
About a little.
I love me a bit of Skaven.
Yeah, got like 49% of the vote.
Holy cremolians, that's a big chunk.
So we will be heading down into the 9 Circles of Hell Pit next Sunday over on the Lawhammer channel, which is going to be a really, really good time. And the next poll is going to be up on the Lawhammer channel, because I'm tired of having polls on my channel. So we're gonna go figure that out.
It had to go over at mine eventually.
So we're gonna go figure that out. Also, make sure to join us this Wednesday for What If Anarian Had Survived the Cataclysm, which is gonna get wild.
It's a good one. I'm looking forward to this immensely. Wednesday, 10 p.m. UK, whatever your time might be locally, and this is gonna be fun.
Yep, and we'll see y'all when you should have been in Shafty. Would have been cool, but you know, Skaven are fun. It's been a while since we've talked about Skaven.
It has been a wee while since we've done Skaven, so this will be good.
Yeah, anyway, we're going to get out of here. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you take care of yourselves, get some rest.
Been good.
You know, drink some water. Anyway, see you guys later.
See y'all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.